official ones.
The ghost.
We're ready.
Okay. All right, good evening, everybody. Today is March 8th, 2022. This is the work session of the Oregon City Commission. Mr. Wiley, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Rocky Smith. Here. Commissioner Adam Marl. Here. Commissioner Frank O'Donnell. Here. Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Present.
And Mayor Rachel Lyles Smith.
Here. All right, so the first item on the agenda is the list of future work session agenda items. I'll open the floor for discussion. The only thing I have is that I wanted to, I hesitate even bringing it up, but I noticed last week that the city of Portland banned the sale of fireworks within their city limits. And so I'm bringing this up because I thought last year was just a total mess. And I don't think any of us enjoyed that. And obviously we can't predict the future. We don't know what the weather's going to be like, et cetera, et cetera. So my concern, though, is about businesses who are planning now to reserve spaces and sell fireworks. They're probably acquiring inventory if they haven't already. And so I just want to bring it up for this commission, like if there is any desire to have that conversation and act and take action on that, that would affect, I'm not talking about enforcement. I mean, I think that could be part of the conversation. If we bring it back as a work session item, we could get input from the chief, band, and maybe even from Clackamas Fire regarding how things went last year. But that's not really what I'm bringing up unless you guys want to talk about that piece. But it was specifically focused on getting ahead or getting in front of the conversation for businesses who may be planning to come to Oregon City to sell their products. So I just wanted to put it out there. I'm actually not supportive of that. I support leaving things as they are traditionally and letting folks, you know, I like to put a lot of trust, and I like what I thought last year actually went pretty well once we got past all of the craziness of whether or not to ban or not ban and how are we going to do what we're going to do and what the rules are. So I'll stop there and see what you guys think.
I have no problem having a discussion about the topic.
So let me rephrase.
I agree.
Let me rephrase. I'm not interested in taking action. So if this is a topic that you want to take up because you think we may want to take action, then that should be what you're putting forward because you have an interest in that.
I do.
Okay. I just want to be really clear.
Yeah, that's fine. I should have been more clear.
I'll join Commissioner McGriff. I do also.
You want to have the,
Yep.
we have,
I'm fine with continuing how we did it last year.
Well, what did we do last year?
did not ban fireworks. We didn't do
Right.
anything.
But an increased scrutiny on illegal fireworks.
About what?
An increased scrutiny on legal fireworks, yes. And I think we had conversations with Chief Band and.
Did we truly increase scrutiny on illegal fireworks? How many contacts did we make? I question that.
I don't know. I think what we did, I know as a minimum, we stepped up our communications about what legal fireworks are and aren't. And I don't think we can have this conversation right now. I mean, it's more of a, if we want to have the conversation, we'll bring it back. This is to identify it for a future topic so that the chief can be prepared to respond to questions like that.
Well, it looks like you got 2 and 2, so we'll set them to commissioners.
I have no interest in discussing it.
I think the 3, I'm sorry, refresh my memory, it was yes, yes, and yes, right?
I'm not
You were
interested.
no. You were no.
Leave it alone, so it was.
Yeah, I'd say leave it alone.
Okay.
I think it's something if we need to talk about it, we need to get ahead of it, whatever we decide, because I thought some of the community members acted very irresponsibly last year, and that's my concern.
Well, I think we're going to have that anytime, any year. So it sounds like there is not general consensus to have this topic. We'll keep things as is and deal with it as it comes. Any other potential future agenda item topics?
Well, we have work to do, but some of it needs to be done in executive session, so we can have those discussions outside of here, and they need to be done in a timely manner, because the clock's running on specific items. We'll have that as an aside discussion, not in public.
You have anything for us, Mr. Conkle? No, okay. All right, I think we can move on then.
I do have a question for Mr. Conkle about, excuse me, the first item on the work session for April the 12th. So do we, as much as I love the Planning Commission, do we really need to have another work session? I thought our last conversation was we were going to go back and do what we're going to do tonight, revise the goals, and then move this puppy along. Is there something else specific that we need to have a discussion with them about?
If I'm recalling correctly, that there was a desire at the last joint planning commission meeting to meet again as a joint meeting. If there's no desire to do that, we're happy to take that off and just let it work through the process.
Well, if there was a specific topic we were addressing, yeah, I mean, I'd love to get some of this stuff adopted.
Well, there's a public hearing scheduled for OC 2040 that's already kind of planned for, I believe it starts in May.
Right, on the 14th of March.
So,
The 14th of March is for the House Bill 2001. And so those public hearings, that's actually a work session at Planning Commission. And then the actual public hearing is on the 28th. And just to address Commissioner McGriff's question, so we did hear direction for the two bodies to come back together. And the intention of that meeting was to show both groups kind of the finalized goals and policies. But it doesn't have to be done in a joint work session, especially because Planning Commission went through the work last week. You're going through the work tonight. So that's, your discretion.
I thought of another when you're ready.
and, I mean, I believe that was the direction that we gave them, I recall of having another joint planning session. So why don't we get through the agenda item tonight, and then, or we're going to talk about it, and then if we still need to revisit this item. I will say that there are, I think, a couple of items on the list that we've talked about, me and Lisa and Tony, when we're talking about the agendas, that will likely get placed on the agenda. So even though you see like a date that, like March 16th, who has one item, it's possible that we may end up adding an item there or something like that. So just know that there's still things that are working on, particularly like the ARPA funding. Trying to remember what else. We had a few things that were kind of in holding and trying to get scheduled. Commissioner O'Donnell?
I'm not confident that the members of this commission totally understand the economic development and tourism plan with line items, and I don't feel like I do, and I'd like to hear input from others. I mean, have we requested a line item breakdown on that expense? Have we gotten it, or have I just missed it, or?
I thought we asked for it.
I believe you did request it at a meeting, as I recall.
But is that what's happening on March 16th? Is that the Economic Development Strategy Workshop?
That's different. That would be the citywide. That was one of the goals of the commission, was a citywide economic development strategy. So this is the bigger, more citywide one rather than the more specific tourism strategy. So we have two different documents.
Okay.
Can that encapsulate how we intend to expend the monies that are allocated to that?
We can forward. We've brought this. I guess the question is, we broke down the tourism budget by programs.
Right.
I'm not, so if you're asking for more specificity than that, we can forward that again as to what we brought back the last time we talked about the tourism strategy. And maybe then if there are questions about specific, if you want more detail within those, if that wasn't broken down far enough, then, I guess that's what we would be bringing back.
And do we differentiate between the tourism budget and the economic development budget, or is one captured within the other?
They're captured within each other, but they are broken down because there are dedicated tourism funds that come from the hotel tax.
Right.
And then there were specific budgetary allocations to specific, like to tourism specifically versus more general ECDEV.
I think even within those two subsets, I just don't feel totally confident that as a policymaker, I understand where we're allocating, which I view as a significant amount of funds. And I think what is the allocation? $500,000 for what time period?
2 years.
It's a lot more than that.
More than that.
Yeah.
I just think
In our work plan.
I don't understand the program, and I think that as a policymaker, I should. So that's why I'm asking. So I don't know if the others feel the same way and want to give that direction, or what?
And you're a policymaker on the tourism stakeholders
I am.
committee, which I am too, and I have no idea. So
Yeah.
I feel the same way.
I
And
remember,
have since we
yeah.
passed the budget.
I remember when Mr. Graham came and presented to us, and I thought we all expressed concerns and a lack of detail. I don't know if we were clear in an expectation that come back to us in an email versus a presentation form. So it sounds like we're essentially asking for that to come back to us with more details addressing the questions that we had the first time that he presented it to us, because I think we had a whole myriad of questions and concerns about how the money was being spent. I would support that. I think we have at least 3. I think there's general consensus. So, Mr. Conkle, can you please put that on the list or follow up with Mr. Graham?
Yes, ma'am.
Anything else? All right. Seeing none, I think we can move on to our discussion items. The first item we have on the agenda is the OC 2040 Comprehensive Plan Update, and this is input on our draft goals and policies. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. So I am here with, on Zoom, our consultant, Anais Mathis from 3J. And so we're going to eventually jump into the draft goals and policies. When you met with the Planning Commission back in January, several questions came up that we thought could be addressed more efficiently in individual meetings, and then going through kind of this input on the wording and the documents. So I have a few slides for you, and then we will go into the wording of the policies and goals. Okay, so tonight, our meeting objectives are to revisit the comprehensive plan streamlining approach and review an understanding of equity and planning, discuss how goals and policies will be applied during the land use process, and then we'll jump in and we'll review and refine the draft goal and policy language. So the comprehensive plan streamlining was one of the objectives that we had when starting out with this project. We wanted to make it more intuitive and make it a more user-friendly document. Comprehensive plans are intended to be high level, and they're policy documents that guide city decisions. Part of our approach for this was to reduce the overall bulk of the document and keep the goals and policies at a higher level with fewer of them. And over time, the commission will direct projects and programs to implement the plan, but the implementation actions aren't part of the comprehensive plan itself. So one of the questions that came up in, I think, several different settings when we were talking about the goals and policies was this idea of equity and using the word equitable in some of the policies. So we wanted to just provide a little bit of background about why that term is used in some of the policies. especially when describing the transportation investments. So I think first it's important to remember that when OC 2040 started, it kind of kicked off in the summer of 2020 when there was a lot going on in the world and the nation, and there was an increased focus on equity and inclusion. So one of the lenses that OC 2040 was formed under was this idea of equity. I'm sure there's more than one definition that's out there. The one that we've put on the slide comes from the American Planning Association, and it's defined as just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential, unlocking the promise of the nation by unleashing the promise in us all. So that's one way of looking at it. And mobility and transportation are seen as important for moving the needle toward equity. For example, there's oftentimes individuals who may be transit dependent may live in lower density areas, and it becomes more costly to serve lower density areas with transit. The cost per rider ends up going up, and therefore you may not get as much service. You kind of get diminishing levels of service. So it's one way to think about how to ensure that, folks who need transit are able to get it. So that's kind of just a very brief discussion on that topic. So in the comprehensive plan, the goals and policies will get applied to some of our land use reviews. And this was a question that came up in the joint meeting as well, as how are these policies and goals going to be applied. So there are several land use applications that require applicants to address the appropriate goals and policies. And so typically those are type 3 and type 4 applications. And so what type 3 and type 4 means is there's a lot of discretion, there's decisions to be made, and so they are heard in public hearings in front of the Planning Commission, and then they can be appealed to the City Commission. So this is a list of those types of land use applications. The language that you see on the slide, the proposal satisfies the goals and policies of the city comprehensive plan, which apply to the proposed use. That criteria can be found in each of these types of land use applications. And so that's how it gets applied specifically to land use decisions, but really it is a kind of overarching guiding document. Okay. So that was actually basically all of my slides to go through some of the questions that came up. So we're going to dig into the details, and the way that we've set this up and the way that we'd like to do this is our consultant who is on Zoom, Anna East, she's going to share her screen, and we will go through each goal and policy kind of section by section. And so what you have in your packet and what Anna East will show is the version that the Planning Commission looked at last week. Okay, so can we switch from the slideshow?
You should be able to share your screen.
Can everyone see that?
Can you zoom it in, and we'll just look at one piece at a time, because we can't, well, I can't read that at all.
There we go.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. Okay, So first, I would like to thank Commissioner McGriff and our Planning Commissioner, Mike Mitchell, who gave us some red lines. So that was kind of the basis of what's in here. And other comments that I received, like from Commissioner Marl, I incorporated those comments as well. So that was kind of our baseline, and then we went through with the Planning Commission and our consultant last week, and just kind of went section by section and looked at any changes, answered any questions, and had discussion.
I have a question before you get started. So on this topic of understanding how this is going to be used, my struggle with the way that it's presented is that I totally get the goals, right? They're a visionary statement. But then the policies are action items. To me, they're action items. They're not vision statements around a specific topic of what we're trying to achieve in 2040. So I'm struggling as a policymaker who has to make decisions on budget and staffing and you know, going through that process of looking at this and saying, I feel like this is kind of creating a budget document in a sense of the future of Oregon City spending, like we're investing in housing or we're investing in the, like it, because these are action items, are very action oriented, it feels more like a work plan than it does for between now and 2040 versus just being a guiding document of our vision for 2040. You see what I mean? Like if I'm talking about housing, my statement for 2040 may be that all communities, or, you know, all persons, you know, our housing needs analysis is met and we have buildable inventory and supply, yada, 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 in 2040. But the statements in here are more like, we're going to support programs and serve Oregon City's unhoused residents and meeting daily needs while offering stable and lasting solutions. Like, so can you help me with that? Like, what am I missing here? Am I looking at it completely wrong?
So I can understand where you're coming from. When you see an action item, I can see how you make the connection of, okay, so do we need to budget for this? And that the answer is, I guess, no and yes, yes and no. So that's where the implementation part comes in. So it's not, they're not necessarily action items until we're ready to take action on them. I guess part of why we wanted to kind of get your input there is if we can find a way to still get at the sentiment that's in the statement without making it something actionable or something that you as a body are not feeling comfortable with. So there are implementation pieces that will have to come from this, but they come later. They come when you're making your kind of goals for the biennium and how does that fit into the comprehensive plan. I might be able to answer it more clearly on specific items, but.
So for example, if the Planning Commission, it starts at the Planning Commission, right? So say they had a subdivision that's coming in and they're reviewing a subdivision application and they have to address the comp plan and how it meets the comp plan. If I'm looking at, I'll say goal 3 of this page that's up that Anais has up, you know, strengthen health and livability across Oregon City neighborhoods by creating places that feel safe and comfortable with convenient access to community services. Like, And then I look at the policies, which are, again, they're very action-oriented. So is it that the applicant and the planning commission would have to look through this policy, these list of policies, and say, you know, does the subdivision that's being proposed, are they supporting unhoused residents? Oh, nope, that doesn't meet that box. Are they building enhancing partnerships between police, government agencies, neighborhood, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, and it doesn't apply like that
so
specifically.
tell me how it's applied. That's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, so if someone's coming in with a subdivision, then we might be looking at, say, on the next page, under diverse economy. And goal 2 is provide housing options, including both rental and ownership opportunities. So how does this subdivision plan support that? Or are there any of these policies that are applicable to that? And so what we're going to be looking for is, did the applicant address the kind of the correct criteria? Did they skip over housing altogether, even though they're providing a subdivision? And we wouldn't expect them to necessarily address every item. So they may not have anything to do, any criteria to meet in, say, like protected environment. They might, if there's a natural resource near their subdivision. The applicant for a subdivision would probably take a look at some of the connected infrastructure and say the applicant's extending sanitary sewer, and it's going to provide, a safe and reliable infrastructure system to this new subdivision.
I'm going to let this go so that we can continue this meeting because I'm dragging this out. I guess what I'm getting to is when I look at this, I don't see any way any land use application will ever be denied for not meeting our comprehensive plan. I cannot tie a land use application to looking at this and saying, nope, they're not providing this, or there's one item out of here. Like, I cannot make that connection, and therefore I don't feel like our comprehensive plan will have the teeth that it needs to be a checks and balances of land use. And maybe it's just me and I'm struggling with it. I see Mike Mitchell's in the audience, who's our planning commission chair, and there's others that are smarter on this than I am, but that's just where I'm struggling, because I know from a policy perspective, when we're asked to review these big, long documents that you guys put together of each one of these comp plan goals and stuff, like, does it meet, and I think our neighborhoods, and I think of the contentious items we have, that they show up here and they're like, why does it say it meets the comp plan? Everything in this document says that it checks all the documents, and we don't feel like it checks the documents. So I guess I'm just recalling the last 3 years of that, and I'm trying to figure out, like, are we creating a document that's really just gonna cause us a lot of heartburn and not actually give us something that is usable? It's one thing for it to be all visionary or whatever. I'll just stop there. I'm just, I guess, venting on where I'm at. I don't know that I follow it, but Commissioner O'Donnell.
I just want the record to show that I agree with everything. I just want the record to show that I agree with everything you said. It's aspirational to the point of, I recognize the 40,000 foot level, but it doesn't do what it needs to do. I guess I'm more a meat and potatoes kind of guy, and that's not this kind of document.
I guess.
So I agree with everything you said, and I'll stand with you on that.
That's where you have the standards and criteria, and as far as I'm aware, and Christina helped me out here, when we are approving a subdivision, I don't believe that we're addressing the goals. But if we were doing a comprehensive plan amendment and zone change, or we're doing something where there's discretion, such as a conditional use permit, it is asking you to take a look at the comprehensive plan. But if a subdivision's generally not going through a process where you're using clear and objective standards because it's already allowed in the zone, and then you're applying the standards, which is, does it meet the street width? Does it meet the setbacks? Does it meet the water thing? Does it meet, those are the standards. We're not going to be addressing comp plan goals in a subdivision application, as I'm recalling.
Yeah, that's correct, Commissioner McGriff. I think what the Planning Commission and City Commission look at comprehensive plan goals is when you are asking for a variance. So you're at maybe you have a subdivision with a variance that has to go to the Planning Commission. And so that variance request, what are you asking to have variance for? And then really you are looking at, of all the comprehensive plan policies, what staff often does with their variance, we look at, in today's comprehensive plan, what are the 5 or 7 things that are relevant to the thing you're asking the variance for? And if it may be neighborhood livability or transportation or what the comp plan policy is. And those are the areas that the Planning Commission looks at. So if you are just doing an application that implements the city code, you don't have to make findings to support the comprehensive plan because our code already did that. Our code made findings. So it's really when you're asking for a zone change, a variance, a planned unit development where you're looking at discretion, that you look at the comprehensive plan to see if it provides any more guidance on that request.
Okay, so I used a poor example of subdivision. There's several others that you just said that I know that we've had this come before us, and whether or not I used the right planning term, I apologize. So if it was a zone change,
correct.
That's still coming before us, and I'm still trying to figure out, is this a document that we can actually use as a checks and balances for the vision for our city? And I guess if the Planning Commission, is feeling like they can do that, and maybe I'll speak for myself, that I, as a city commissioner or mayor, need more education on that of how this is going to be used, and that's fine.
Let's say there was a property that was zoned campus industrial or employment, and they wanted to do a zone change to some type of a residential use.
That'd be a comp plan amendment.
Right, so you got a comp plan and a zone change amendment combined. So we would look at ensure a suitable amount of land is dedicated to employment uses. And so if we're finding that we're deficient in employment, that would be something to weigh in that request to change it from employment to residential or employment to commercial, or ensure that land use plan for housing supply that supports and implements the recommendations of the current housing needs analysis. I'm in, what am I in? Diverse economy goals 1 and 2, policies A's and B's. So I've got a property, I'm zoned multifamily, high density residential. Our housing analysis shows we need additional multifamily. They come in and want to do a comp plan amendment to low density residential and a zone change to R10. So that's where we would weigh, if they want to take 1 acre because they own 5 next to it, or if they want to take 10 acres, that's a big part of our housing supply for multifamily, that'd be a justification for a denial. So I think we all hear what you're saying. I think it's very, probably application specific, depending on what the request is, because theoretically, comp plan and zone change amendments should be pretty rare. And so, you're weighing that against what our vision is, and there are going to be some that are specific to existing plans, existing infrastructure. If we didn't plan for a certain use in an area, that may mean our typical 8-inch sewer line needs to be updated to a 12-inch. I mean, I'm making up hypotheticals here, but some of these are going to be very specific to a specific application that comes in. And some are going to be really visionary. They're
visions.
Aspirational at this point.
You have to think of it as a hierarchy of documents. So we have the comp plan, which is what I call if you use the triangles, the pinnacle. Then you have the zoning code. Then you have the other codes that come into that make up sort of the triangle. And depending on, as Tony said, what application it is, you're going to apply them in different ways. So think about that in terms of the discretion. If the application is something that doesn't allow for discretion, it says the code is this or it's that, and we don't even deal with the comp plan, and we wouldn't be dealing with it. So I agree with the city manager. It is going to be very application specific on how we are applying this, because again, we spent all this time on this. We're not going to change the comp plan on a dime. We are going to have it be, it's the thing that holds everything else in place. So we're not going to arbitrarily just say, oh yeah, let's just change the comp plan. We're not. And we're not arbitrarily going to change the zoning code unless it's within the same category. So if it's like low density residential, they want to go from 6 to 8, that's the same category. You're not even going to go up that hierarchy ladder. So I think we are okay in terms of how we would apply this. And while you're looking at it as more directives, I'm looking at it as aspirational. So we say, promote the Willamette and Clackamas rivers as a community benefit. We might be able to do that by implementing a parks master plan. And the master plan will say, yes, we need to preserve the shoreline of the Willamette River because of, yada, 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 in the state division of lands. So that comp plan policy could provide us some direction, or it could just be more aspirational. So, again, we both think like that. So seeing how you're thinking about it helps me think about it in a more logical standpoint. And I appreciate the question, because it's reasonable to be asked that.
So does this document come into play? For example, supposing that we have a fear that all we are destined to become is a bedroom community, yet one of our goals is to provide employment. So say we have somebody come in here that they want to change an area that's designated for industrial use. They want to build housing in there instead.
What the example Tony just used.
This document then comes into play?
Yes. This document would say our aspirational goal and our plan is that we are not going to convert industrial land into residential, because we have plenty, blah, 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 blah. We have a deficit in this area. So no, we're not going to decrease the amount of available land we have for commercial and industrial to change it into something else. This document would definitely come into play.
Okay.
Let's say, I think Commissioner McGriff is right. When we think about the zoning code, there's a lot of things that happen at the staff level because they're considered what are categorized as clear and objective standards. So you've got a 60% transparency requirement on the front of a commercial building. So if your building's 100 foot wide, 60 feet of it need to be transparent. Get out a ruler, it meets it, right? Let's just say, and all buildings need to be within 5 feet. All commercial buildings need to be within 5 feet of the sidewalk. Now, they want to build it 50 feet back. So they're into either some type of a modification or in some cases a variance. Once again, these are site specific depending on the application and how they're proposing it. But there's, sorry, I just lost it. It talked about promoting, anyway, it's saying, the intent of the building is to encourage good design that offers good public spaces, right? So that's kind of how you're weighing it, because how do you you can't just clear and objectively say, if you go back 50 feet, you do X, right? Because it's so site specific. It could be topography related. It could be natural resource related. So this is really for when those ones that don't fit the code as it's written, what do you fall back to try to approve or make a justification to approve or deny or approve with conditions?
I think that's great. So just know when I look at this document, I see lots of statements in here that I don't feel are applicable. Yep. Because when I look at this, Goal 1 of diverse economy, the policy is regularly update citywide economic studies to guide development of strategies and policies that improve economic health and resiliency. To me, that has nothing to do with action that's taking place by a developer or anything like that. That is all about city staff updating economic policies on a regular basis. That is a directive, an actionable item for the city staff to do stuff that, to me, I don't understand why that is something that is there's no way, or please tell me how that is applicable to a criteria, a zone change or something like that where this will come into play. That's why I'm struggling with this document, because I feel like it's a mesh. It's trying to do a bunch of stuff, and I can't figure out what it's trying to do.
So, that one in particular, so part of what this document is trying to do is also meet our state goals, state land use goals. So for Goal 9, that's economic development, when we present this to Department of Land Use Conservation, they're going to look at it against the state goals and say, okay, we can see how you're trying to address Goal 1 with supporting citizen involvement, the Citizen Involvement Committee. We can see how you're trying to address Goal 5 by recognizing historic resources. We can see how you're trying to address Goal 9 when you talk about some of these economic health and resiliency. So there, I mean, you're correct in saying that there is kind of a mix of what we're trying to get at in here. So part of that is getting at those state land use goals.
Got to wear many hats. The goals our policy statements have to wear several hats in terms of checking boxes with state agencies. I mean, all the agencies are going to look at it. ODOT's going to look at it, for coordination, natural resources group's going to look at it. So I think we've done a good job of being broad and comprehensive, but also saying, okay, maybe we need to do this, this, and this.
Okay, let's move on. Obviously, I don't know what else to say. Clearly, several of us, or at least a couple of us, are puzzled by this conversation. I'm interested to know if Planning Commission had this conversation, or if, are they as perplexed as I am about this, or can we have our Planning Chair or Vice Chair come up, or? No, he doesn't want to speak on.
I'm not saying I don't want to come up.
It's up to the pleasure of the commission, but we don't have to go down that route. We have a lot of things on the agenda. I'll let it go, unless you guys want to.
I wouldn't mind hearing what the perception was from Planning Commission.
Okay.
I mean, does the document do what the goal is to do? And obviously, we have different perceptions of what the document should accomplish, and some feel that it does, and some feel that it doesn't.
And I actually agree with everything that you've said as well, but then at the same time, I was seeing this 2040 document as really more of a even higher view, general, view, and I'm not seeing that with this. So I'm as mixed as you are in terms of really knowing what this is, because to me, 2040, if I read this and said this is our goal for what 2040 is going to look like in Oregon City, I'd move right now, because this is in terms of a real vision of what I want to see in 20 years. This is a list of things, but it's not as grandiose for me in terms of a vision. So, and you're seeing it kind of more as a
tactical, application.
Maybe it's sometimes when it's trying to do too many things, it does nothing well.
And that's what I'm struggling with.
That's where I'm at.
We have a majority. Mr. Mitchell, would you like to come up and give us some comments? And I know you're only one person out of an entire planning commission, and so maybe I should allow you to say.
Thank you for saying that, because that was the first thing I was going to say.
Okay.
This is just my opinion. To the idea of whether or not this is what the planning commission, whether or not we think it's sufficient, we were not asked that question. We were presented with what it was. The first time I saw it, I speak for myself now, the first time I saw it, and I believe our consultant will remember this, I asked some of those same questions. Is there enough specificity here for us to know that we are living up to the statewide planning goals and living up to what we want as a city? And the response was, and I hate to put words in other people's mouth, but she's on the call so she can speak up, is that the direction that the consultant was given was that the city commission wanted to see a much more streamlined, much more high-level document than our current comprehensive plan. And based on that information, that kind of put an end to that part of the discussion with the Planning Commission, because this is what the City Commission wanted, was a very high-level document. I will say Mr. Conkle started me down a road, and I was, that helped a lot. At our joint meeting, I believe, when he brought up, think about this in a negative fashion. If something comes before us, let's make sure that it doesn't harm any of the policies that are in our comprehensive plan. It may not do anything with it, but let's just make sure it doesn't take a step backward. And that kind of helped, because there are some of these that they won't necessarily, a proposal won't necessarily move us forward, but it won't move us backwards. And that helped me a little bit. And again, I'm just speaking for myself, but is it too high level? Personally, I have that concern, and I have since the beginning.
So did the city commission, or the planning commission, it sounds like maybe you didn't discuss this, but did it ever come up as far as the issue that we're kind of seeing, that it feels like it's trying to be multiple documents in one, of being very action oriented and goal driven at the same time, and it's mixing what the city should be doing versus being a checks and balances document or a visionary document?
Yeah, that did come up in the sense that there were several comments of, we can't afford to do this. There's a budget implication here. Are we now committing our city to doing something that we can never afford to do?
Right. I mean, I have those questions too that are in here. Yeah.
That discussion did come up. Yes.
Okay.
Can I add a couple of things? So the thing that I think we're missing is that these goals are the effort of over 2.5 years of community involvement, community participation, and the community's ideas of what they thought our goals should be for the comp plan. So I take this seriously in terms of all of the work. I only ended up participating for the last 1.5 years, but there's people that have been doing a lot of yeoman's work. So this didn't just come out of thin air. This did not come out of the consultants. This came out of our community members and what they felt was appropriate for the comp plan. The topic headings of healthy and welcoming communities, the diverse economy, those were the 4 things, constructed infrastructure, those were the basic framework of where we put categories of where things are. So the comprehensive plan is all of the things that you said. It's got action items in it. It's got aspirational items in it. It gives some direction for the implementing ordinances that come under the comprehensive plan. So there will be some things that come out of this that are site-specific in code, that will get put into code or changed in code. So it is a document that is a guide on how our community is going to look or be, or where it's going for the future. And it's written in a way that it can be many things all at once. That's kind of how they are designed. And our staff has done, and our consultants have done, a yeoman's job in corralling all those thoughts and community input into this final thing. And again, so Commissioner Mitchell and I did a little wordsmithing, because there was some things that we thought, well, this word really doesn't really fit our community. But in essence, I believe that this does capture what the community told us over the last 2.5 years of this process. And I'm supportive of that. That was a lot of work. I mean, you were on it, I was on it. We spent a lot of time going back and forth with all this stuff.
And I agree completely. I think the consultant and staff did a remarkable job, given the fact that we couldn't get together face to face and pound it out over a table with COVID going on, and they reached out for public input in places where we've never asked for public
Exactly.
input before.
It was,
And I think what's here does very accurately and very well represent what the community wanted.
yeah,
But is it,
I agree.
So let me just be very clear, because I support the
yeah.
work that's gone on, and I want to be really clear about what I am fully supportive of. I am fully supportive of the topics, the categories. I'm supportive of the goal statements. My issue is the policies.
Yes.
And where
Yes.
I'm not, I do not at all want to throw any of that out. I think it was all great work, and I think the wordsmithing, I think we've done, you guys, everybody's done a lot of work to get it to where it is, and I think it's great. I think the policies is my area of issue, and I feel like what the community, what I see from listening to your statement is what they want the city to do. This isn't, not necessarily a, they want the city to do X, Y, and Z, which is different to me than saying this is a policy statement. And so that's where I'm struggling.
Is it the word policies? Maybe that's the word that's hanging you up.
Sure, that could be it, if there's another word for that, for what we're trying to capture here, because to me, those are not policy statements. And this says that they're all policies under each one of these goals. And that's where, and I totally can see that our community said, we want you to support the CIC. We want you to promote the rivers. We want you to acknowledge our history and tribal presence. I totally agree. And I am sure our community said that. My issue is just how it's written and presented as policies and action items, and it's what I feel they said, this is what we want the city to do.
Or this is what we want to see.
Or this is what we want to see, and that's where my struggle is, so.
We may get there in some of it, and some of it we may not.
Yeah.
But we can aspire. We can aspire to get there, but we may not get there on everything. I think about the old comprehensive plan.
Can I bring up one really quick example, and then I'll sit down and get out of your hair? A year and a half ago, maybe, before the Planning Commission, we had an item that was quite controversial with the neighbors regarding expansion of an assisted living facility. And that's an item where the Planning Commission has a great deal of discretion. And I went back to the comprehensive plan thinking, okay, is there anything in here that maybe that's going to help me balance the neighbors versus the community? And we have a policy that says that we should not create, a specific policy in our comprehensive plan says we should not create barriers to facilities for senior residents. Okay, that's pretty clear. That gave me policy direction that I could apply to that case. And I don't think this document gets to that. Maybe we don't need it, but this is a very different document than our current comprehensive plan.
I appreciate you coming up and giving your input, and I know it may have been a little uncomfortable because you do not represent the entire Planning Commission. It was just one person's opinion, so. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Once again, I agree with you. I mean, I've got no issue with the goals whatsoever. Every one of them is commendable, and I support them. Struggle over the use of the word policies, and maybe that's all that needs to be changed. And maybe they're just potential approaches or possible approaches. But once you state it as a policy, then it's a commitment to do just that.
Well, I'm looking up a synonym.
Commissioner Marl.
Thank you, Mayor. I hate to say this, but I agree with Commissioner McGriff. I'm kidding. When we're looking at goal 1 here, implement and maintain, goal 1 of the first category we have.
Right.
Implement and maintain a community engagement program that provides broad and inclusive opportunities for all Oregon City community members to learn about and understand, blah, blah, blah. I think that, this is very different from our current comp plan. And I think the format gets exactly to what that first goal says. We want our guiding documents, we want them to be detail-oriented, but we also want them to be accessible for regular citizens who, for the last year, have been complaining to us that these processes that we have in place are too complicated for them to understand as people who are not land use planners, as people who are not lawyers, and are trying to represent their communities, represent their neighborhoods in front of boards and committees the best that they can with complicated legalese that they don't understand. So I agree with Commissioner McGriff, and I think she got to the crux of it. Maybe if we just changed the word policies, because I sit on the project advisory team as well, and there are several slides that are in each of their presentations, and one of them is always, it's like goals, and then something else, policies, and then action items. And so trying to differentiate what those things are, I think, is what our biggest problem is. I don't think we need to necessarily throw out everything we have, but I am open to having that conversation about changing the word policies, because I do understand where you guys are coming from. It can be confusing, but there is a level below that, which includes the actual action items that have been discussed here.
Strategy or approach?
Are you saying that this is just the high-level document and there's action items and more detail that's going to go into this plan that may change our perspective of how this is currently reading?
So, yes, it is a high-level document, and what you're seeing in front of you will get filled out a bit, but not much more. So the action items, the implementation items would come from a different action altogether. So I was trying to pick a specific example, and I don't know if I can pull one out, but well, maybe an example would be something that we just did, right? If we are supporting multiple types of housing, then one of your goals to provide more housing options, and the action item would be to go through a housing needs analysis and then to look at the code. So this document won't have that kind of action in it. The action and implementation of it comes later. Did that make sense? Okay.
It does. I was just trying to understand what Commissioner Marl was saying and what he was seeing on slides that they were presented that we haven't seen. So I was just trying to.
Well, I think I've got it on one of the slides. Would you mind switching back to the slideshow? I think this is what he's referring
I can
to.
live with this.
Thank you. Is that what you're
Yes.
referring to, Commissioner
Yes.
Marl? So we start with the high level vision. And so in the document in front of you, kind of those, the color bars is, I think, where the vision statements lie. And then the next level down is the goal. And I might be able to read this. Goals are broad statements of purpose that determine what the community wants to achieve. And then below that, policies. Policies are a clear statement guiding a specific course of action for decision makers to achieve a desired goal. And then action items are objectives that describe how the policy will be achieved. And that part, that implementation part, is kind of what comes later through individual actions. Another example might be in terms of a diverse economy. Perhaps there's a direction to do a economic opportunities analysis and analyze how much employment land, industrial land, that kind of thing. That would be an implementation item.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I can actually live with the document with a simple change of changing the word policy to strategy. Strategy, as defined, is a plan of action designed to achieve a major or overall aim. That's a strategy.
One of the synonyms.
As you said, and I looked it up to be sure that I could live it, and I can. And it's less restrictive than saying it's a policy. A strategy, you may or may not adopt it, but it's there for your consideration.
Mm-hmm.
It can lead to an action item, which would be changing the code to allow for,
Right.
lesser setbacks for X, Y, or Z.
I can live with that.
I think that's great.
I'm okay with it.
Because it doesn't lock you in, it's a consideration. Here's a potential strategy that you could use, not you must as a matter of policy.
I think that makes more sense.
And can you live with that? That word helps.
I think so, yeah.
Hey, we're all good.
Commissioner Smith?
Better.
I'm just trying to make sure that, I mean, we had this whole exercise that we were supposed to do tonight, and truthfully, we're into this and we haven't even started it, so I'm not sure that we should even start this exercise. But I think it's important that we have the right frame of mind and reference on what I'm actually reviewing and wordsmithing, and I'm not able to do that without having clear direction of what this is how it's going to be used. And, you know, I don't want another document that's just on the shelf that doesn't serve any purpose or doesn't serve the purposes that we need it to. And I want to be really clear about the purpose that it's serving and how it's going to be used. I guess my opinion at this point is that in general, if we have general consensus to change the word policies to strategies, we can mull that over and then probably bring this task back to us in the next work session. Was the next work session the one that only had one item on it? Since we just had the future planning items?
We'll make it, we'll fit it in.
May I clarify, would you like it to come back on March 16th, or would you like to actually go through it jointly with the Planning Commission? Okay, thank you. All right,
No.
that's what I wanted to clarify.
Yeah, so March 16th is our regular meeting.
So it won't
be the 16th. That's why I was looking at my calendar and that date, that doesn't work, so.
I'm trying to get back to the,
Well, and that's just my proposal, but I'll look to the commission to see what would you like to do to tackle this item. We can keep moving forward with what we need to do tonight, or we can let this sit, or what?
so on April 12th, which would be our next regular work session, we had joint work session with Planning Commission OC 2040.
I'm ready to continue getting this done.
So instead of a joint work session with Planning Commission, we would just bring this back in that spot?
What do you think?
Fine to me.
Okay with me.
Not going to disrupt your schedule of what you're trying to accomplish,
No, not too much.
as long as we don't wholesale change the whole thing. I think what I'm trying not to do is have this conversation that we've had for the last 45 minutes completely derail this document. So I think it's important that we have a clear direction or a clear frame of mind in how we're reviewing this document. Clearly, Commissioner McGriff has that, but the rest of us, or at least 3 of us, do not. And so I think it's important, because otherwise I'm going to wordsmith the heck out of this thing to change these action-oriented policies to make them policies, not actions. And so that's why this is important to try to tackle this. I apologize for derailing this entire thing, but I'm just trying to understand the level of wordsmithing that I need to do.
That's why
or provide comments back.
That's why we volunteered to go back and do this, so you guys wouldn't have to do any more wordsmithing to it. That was the goal.
Well, unfortunately, that was the goal for tonight, was to actually step through this section by section and to make sure, right, to make sure that it was where we wanted it to be.
Right, that was the goal, yeah. I apologize for interrupting. Our consultant has her hand raised, and so I'm wondering if I misspoke about the
timeline.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
Madam Mayor.
No. You weren't misspeaking. Sorry, I hear a delay or a lag in my voice, so it's a little strange. But what I wanted to say was that would it be helpful to come back with examples of actions versus policy language? or just some examples of what the difference in language is between a goal statement versus a policy statement versus an action item?
No, my issue is that I know the difference and this doesn't match. My issue is that these are action statements in the middle of where it says it's a policy statement. And it's not clear to me who the action is and how an action applies to a zoning code change or how this document is supposed to be used. So my issue is I know those definitions and what they mean, and I don't feel like this aligns for me. Commissioner O'Donnell.
I've got no argument with anything you said tonight. I do think the simple change from policy to strategy, a single meaning of those two words is incredibly different. If you look up policy, which I just did, is a course of action adopted by a government. We're not adopting these. As a strategy, they're a potential avenue of response, but they're not necessarily adopted. So therefore, you're not locked in.
But we are adopting these.
But you're not adopting them as a policy, you'd be adopting them as a strategy.
A direction.
Whether you choose to exercise that strategy is different than, hey, you're violating your own policy, which you adopted and said you'd do this, which I don't want to be placed in that position because I don't think it's tenable.
Okay. So what's the pleasure of the commission for? So let me ask Aquila this question. So what was your expectations for tonight? I thought you brought the document up on the screen and we were going to step through and you wanted to, make sure that we were okay with the language, right? It had been wordsmithed. There's a red line version.
Correct.
Right?
Right. Correct. And make changes. The point of bringing it up on the screen so is that if you had changes, we could do it in the moment and you could see how that read. But yes, that's correct. That was the intention.
Okay, Commissioner Marl.
Thank you, Mayor. I think, I was hoping to go through this tonight, but I am glad that we had this conversation. I think if we strike the joint meeting with the Planning Commission for the next work session and do this in lieu of that, that would be good. And in the meantime, I know last time, Director Hurd-Ravitch sent us each individual emails about what we would like to see, and those were incorporated. And I do have a few more after seeing the one with Commissioner McGriff and Commissioner Mitchell's red lines that I would like to see as well. So I think in the meantime, if we could do that again, get in some more individual specified edits or red lines we would like to see, and then bring it back and hopefully have a more cohesive document that aligns with the 5 of ours values and visions for this statement, that would be a good place to start.
That sounds fine to me. Yes, okay. Sounds like we have general consensus on bringing this back. I think we'd be here another hour or two if we were to do that line by line.
Sure. So yeah, we will bring it back April 12th. I guess just one more clarification then. Is there also general consensus about how this document will be applied?
Well, I think you provided both you and Mr. Conkle have provided some good examples, and also Christina Gardner provided good examples of how it's used. And like Mr. Mitchell said, I think that was part of the issue, is that we can think of how it's been applied, and I was struggling to see how this document could actually be applied in those scenarios, and would it help us, or are we creating a document that's just going to end up approving everything that came in front of us, with the rare exception that somebody proposes changing industrial to, R10 zoning, which is unlikely to happen. So I can easily come up with scenarios that are way outside the box that are unlikely that this document, anyway, I'll just stop talking. I feel like I have enough direction at this point.
That's helpful. I just wanted to understand, where we needed to, how to frame it for that next work session. So thank you.
I guess I'll try to look at it with that lens, and if I'm still struggling, I think that's where the wordsmithing comes in, right? Is whether or not I feel like the way something is worded, even as a strategy, will provide us that tool that this is supposed to be. I understand it's supposed to be a high-level document and providing guidance and strategy, but it is also a tool, and it is also something that gets appealed and comes before us with folks who are upset with how it's being, decisions that are being made. And so it's important that we get it right, I think. So, Commissioner O'Donnell.
I just don't want to confound the issue further. I just feel like, I think there's benefit to changing it from policy to strategy, and then by the same token, we start thinking about how it's going to be applied. It's like, well, it's just a strategy. You know, we're not violating anything, so it's a double-edged sword, so.
That's true, yeah.
I think I appreciate what Mr. Mitchell said, because I think, and this was brought up earlier, of not wanting to be a bedroom community. There is an immense amount of pressure to get to single-family detached housing, whether that's industrial, employment, campus industrial. There are some important policy strategies in here that you can fall back on. That is probably going to be one of the biggest things you're going to see, is that there is just a desire to want to build single family because it's quick, it's easy, it sells for a lot of money, right? So there is, I think you'd be surprised how much pressure there actually is.
No, we wouldn't.
On some of those zoned properties that we specifically brought into the urban growth boundary for specific uses. And this does give you that ability to utilize existing studies or existing housing demand or existing employment studies, or the reason we brought it in. When you look at the total of our land uses distributed around the city to make some of those decisions. And I know, some of it's not crystal clear, but there are some pretty good policy strategies in here that, when you're dealing in this completely subjective decision-making, right? I mean, that's the hard part, is that these are subjective calls. They are not going to be clear and objective like the example I gave that we use as staff. So it is difficult to find that right balance, but we hear you.
Well, and I hope that folks don't misconstrue this conversation. I recognize a lot of work has gone into this, and I think there's a lot of good work in the document. So, great job of putting it together, hearing from the community, getting it down on paper in really concise statements. So I appreciate that, and I think there's a lot of good stuff here. So I'm certainly not, I'm trying not to strike the whole thing because it doesn't meet the policy standard versus trade. So anyway, I want to hold true to it as much as possible because I do think it's good work. So I didn't say that earlier, but okay. Anything else?
No.
No. Okay.
Thanks.
Seeing nothing else from the commissioners, I think we can move on. We're at discussion item number 2, potential housing production strategy tools to increase middle housing affordability. Kicking it off. Christina Aquila?
Yes, I will kick it off and hand it directly over to Christina. You need that?
There we go. Director Hurd-Ravitch. Mayor, Commissioners, you're here this evening because embedded in House Bill 2001, which you will have hearings for this spring, which are changes to our development code, the state legislature put a piece in that requires cities to consider, so think about that word is consider, non-land use tools to reduce or to increase affordability of middle housing. And they listed 3 of them, and those 3 are in your packet. And this evening we have Becky Hewitt from Echo Northwest who will go through those 3 options. In House Bill 2003, which came out the next year, the legislature enacted direction for housing production strategies, which is a comprehensive look cities will do as they determine how they will not only zone for, but account and support the creation of housing at all levels. So in Oregon City, we adopted our housing needs analysis this December, and we will have a housing production strategy required for adoption in 2027. So we have this kind of middle period between when a housing production strategy is required that's comprehensive. If the City Commission wants to pursue any of these policies, they can, but they do not have to. So tonight we really are here to meet the legal requirement of House Bill 2001, which is where the City Commission learns about and considers these 3 tools. Yeah, the memo attached to your agenda is written to be a long-term document. So a year from now, you can come back to it and look at it and read it. It's meant to be a reference document for the future. Ms. Hewitt will be here to present and is available to answer any questions you may have about these tools. And with this work session, we do meet the requirement of House Bill 2001, where the city considered these three tools. I'm going to hand it off to our consultant, Becky Hewitt with Echo Northwest.
Good evening, commissioners. Becky Hewitt with Echo Northwest. I'm hoping that you all do not hear the echo that I hear.
We don't.
Okay, then I'll just carry on. So Christina touched on the overview of why we're here and the requirements that are in House Bill 2001. As she mentioned, you're not required to implement these, but just to consider them. So a couple of just overview pieces here. Increasing affordability of middle housing is the language that's used in the rules, and that is intentionally, I think, broad and can include both supporting income restricted affordable middle housing and reducing the cost of market rate middle housing. There are three types of measures that are listed that the jurisdictions need to consider. So waiving or deferring system development charges on new development, property tax exemptions, and there's a list of specific ones that the city is supposed to consider, and then assessing a construction excise tax, which would not in itself increase the affordability of middle housing, but could be used to provide local funding to support affordable housing strategies. So I'm going to touch just briefly on each of those. As Christina said, the purpose for this meeting is to introduce these tools to you at a high level, provide an opportunity for discussion and questions, and the staff is not seeking direction from you at this time, just to present these to you and provide an opportunity for you to give any thoughts that you have. I wanted to start off with just giving a couple of visual examples of some affordable middle housing so that you could kind of have an image of what this might look like. Not everyone has seen affordable housing in a middle housing format. So these are just a couple of examples from around the state, some cottage clusters from the Lane County Housing Authority that were built with donated land and volunteer labor, some townhomes in Portland that provide an affordable home ownership opportunity and received city down payment assistance, as well as I think some other forms of state and federal funding. And then Cully Green, a mixed income development in Portland that's cluster housing and received a property tax exemption and impact fee system development charge waiver, as well as a density bonus. So those are just sort of some illustrative examples of what middle housing could look like if it was affordable. So the first of the sets of tools that was included for consideration, a system development charge waivers or deferrals. So we identified a couple of things that you might consider as a strategy when you do ultimately develop a housing production strategy, which could be allocating some funding from other sources to pay the SDC costs for regulated affordable housing. That can be helpful for particularly middle housing that might have more limited state and federal funding options. And considering changes to SDC rates as part of any future SDC methodology updates to look at ways to reduce the burden on smaller units and wherever it makes sense to scale those SDC rates based on unit size. Because that can support building smaller units, which tend to be a little bit lower cost. And then as a possible near-term measure, because it doesn't require dedicated funding and because it doesn't require a change to methodology, the city could consider allowing developers to pay their system development charges at the time they get their certificate of occupancy rather than at the building permit. This reduces their need to pay money up front and aligns the payment more with when their revenue comes in. So that can help reduce financing costs and just reduce barriers to development for especially smaller developers. Property tax exemptions, there are a number of specific tax exemptions that we've reviewed and considered how they might fit in an Oregon City context. You might expect that affordable housing from a nonprofit would be tax exempt already, property tax exempt already. That is not always the case. They have to do some kind of workarounds to have property taxes exempted if it's not a public housing development. They often partner with the housing authority in order to get that tax exemption, but it is an additional hoop that nonprofit developers have to go through. So a couple of possibilities, again, for longer term consideration would be possible tax exemption for affordable for sale housing that has lasting affordability commitments. So something like a community land trust or Habitat for Humanity, where they are locking in that affordability over the long term. And also considering maybe a tax abatement that could apply based on the design of the units. So things that are providing ADA accessibility or family size units, something that the market is not providing. That's something you would want to identify through your housing production strategy, because that's where you'll identify what those kind of special housing needs are and where the gaps are in terms of what's being produced. So that might be something that you would think about if you identify needs like that aren't being met today as part of your housing production strategy. And then possibly for nearer term, just because it doesn't have any real kind of compliance challenges for the city, and it's a pretty common tax abatement that local governments opt into, is a tax exemption for all nonprofit owned affordable rental housing. So that would be for middle housing, but also for multifamily affordable rental housing. That does still require coordination with and support from overlapping taxing districts. And so that's something to think about if you were to try to move that forward ahead of a broader look. That it does take some coordination with those other taxing districts to try to get them on board to support it as well. And then a construction excise tax. So this is a tax that is imposed on new development and on expansions of existing buildings. It can be applied to commercial industrial development, to residential development, or both. And it's charged as a percentage of permit value. So the larger a project, the more dollars they are putting into that development, the more they would pay in construction excise taxes. And it is regulated under state statute, as all of these things are. And part of the state statute specifies how the funds can be used, which is primarily for local housing programs. Most of the funds are, the city gets to decide sort of how to deploy them to support housing locally. And so it's one of the few sources outside of general fund dollars that the city can generate and control locally to support housing. But it does have some potential negative impacts in terms of development and costs to residential or non-residential development. So what we suggested is that when you get to the housing production strategy, that you might consider a construction excise tax if you find that delivering on your housing needs is going to require some local funding. You might consider it along with other possible local funding sources. And in that consideration, you would want to look at how much revenue it might generate and how much impact it might have on residential and non-residential development, whichever you might consider applying it to. And with that, I think we can take any questions from the commission.
Great.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I can put anything back up that you might have questions about.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Hewitt. As mentioned earlier, this does not require any direction. This is a chance to ask questions of the information provided. Any questions? No?
Questions, but I have some suggestions.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. I really appreciate the information put here. And one of the things that I was very pleased to see that there is no deferring to rental only. I really want us to encourage promotion of ownership where we can, particularly making it affordable. And if there are ways that we can do that, that would help facilitate that. I don't have any issues with doing some of the suggestions because I think that fundamentally people shouldn't be renters forever. And they should have an opportunity and a pathway to get into a home, even if it's smaller. And I, like to say my first house that I ever got into was 900 square feet. Very manageable, as opposed to a, big gigantic house, which you have more things you have to do with. So I think that that's something that we should look at. I think we also need to look at ways that we can preserve existing, small houses that are around our community. Because that is a stepping stone. I don't think everybody aspires to be in a 2,000 square foot home, but we can do a little more to provide those opportunities. I had hoped that some of the development we were doing down at the Cove was going to be affordable for what I call workforce housing. It's unfortunately all market rate. And I think that we need to have some opportunities where we can have more affordable units, but, I'm talking about workforce people who are already kind of there, our nurses, our teachers, so that they can get into housing that fits their needs, as opposed to always deferring to, let's have everybody be renters forever. That's going to suit some people, but it's not for everyone. And again, we're not making a lot of opportunities. So I appreciate the opportunities. I think I mentioned this before during the comp plan update that Juneberry Estates over on, what's the road, Tony? It's not Division. It's, is a really good project that I'd hope that we could see multiples of that. And I'm really looking at, some of our concept areas, particularly in South End, where because of environmental constraints, you can more cluster housing, you can do smaller houses, not necessarily cottage, but, even the attached, I would be great if some of that attached housing we have along South End Road would be great if people had an opportunity to buy into something like that. I mean, brownstones are pretty popular on the East Coast. They never really kind of made it here, but that's basically that concept. So I appreciate the opportunities, and I hope that we do, well, that we don't have to. I think it would be really great if we could figure out some way to do one or two of these things over maybe the next 3 years to make those opportunities available.
Sure.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
So if the presenter, Ms. Hewitt, will put up her first slide, I have a question what one statement applies to. Your introductory slide, please. There is no requirement to implement these measures. Does that apply to that which is stated above, below, or the entire presentation?
The whole presentation. There is no requirement that you implement, that you adopt any of these.
Okay.
It is just required that the city demonstrate having taken these into consideration and given some thought to it.
Understood. I'm at a loss to explain the construction excise tax in pursuit of at least initially affordable housing. I mean, if I'm a builder and you're going to tax me, at some point I have to either add that to the price or recover it and pass it along. The use of it, once it's accrued, I understand its use there and possible uses as you've enumerated here, but the thing is a mystery to me. The only other thing I have a question on, and I want to clarify this because I've said it before, and this will be developed to our community development people. First paragraph of your memo talks about the code amendments will allow middle housing, et cetera. Did we not discuss that would only be in the absence of covenants and restrictions of an existing subdivisions?
Right, thank you. If you have private restrictions or covenants on your deed, that is over and above what may be allowed by the zone. So that often happens where the city may allow it, but you are restricted by your deed.
My understanding is you could not put those covenants and restrictions in the new developments.
Correct.
But if they existed already, they supersede this requirement.
Correct.
Okay, I wanted that to be clear, and that initial paragraph was not clear to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. My understanding of the CET, I guess, and Becky, I'll look to you to make sure I'm thinking of this correctly. And like the layman's terms, is it that we are essentially applying a tax to development, and you're right, the developers will likely pass that charge on for the price of the home. What it does is there are still market rate shoppers out there who can probably afford the higher price, and therefore it allows the city to collect funds that we then use to subsidize affordable housing or housing in a way that we see fit. Does that kind of generally get there, Becky? You're muted.
Yeah.
All right, I lost my unmute button for a second. So you're right that it is a charge to the developer, and that does increase the cost of building housing, and that can, in some cases, that can be passed on to a home buyer. It isn't that how much of it is passed on to a home buyer is not 100% clear. It depends on market conditions and other things, but it can in some cases be passed on to the buyer. But its purpose is to generate revenue that can be used to then fund other supports for affordable housing. So we would not necessarily elevate construction excise tax as a top strategy if we had been creating this list specifically for Oregon City, but it is on the list, and it's something to consider. You don't have to apply it to residential. You can apply it only to commercial and industrial development. You can set some bounds on, it only applies to permit value over a certain amount, for example, so that it would exempt lower cost projects or very small projects and things like that. So it does increase cost. It is not itself a way of increasing affordability, but it provides revenue that can be used to support targeted types of housing development in the city.
Make no mistake, I understand the concept. I just look at the application and I think about the difficulties when you talk about commercial applications. We've already got difficulties in the state of Oregon due to our tax structure in attracting businesses. And then you start saying if it's 3% and you look at millions and millions of dollars, does that break the back of a potential location of a business? I'm not taking I just want to make sure that that's my view on it. I think there's other better tools, and that's not one of them. Thanks.
Yeah, I've heard a presentation from like the city of Bend where they've used it pretty extensively, and I think they tout it when it's also paired with other things. So like going after other housing bonds and housing funds from the federal government and stuff like that. But they have housing staff. They have a whole housing program that's doing grant writing and doing all kinds of work in the housing arena. So my question related to CET, and I'm just curious, I'm not necessarily promoting it. I'm just wondering, can the CET revenues be used for FTE or staff in order to support a housing program, or can those revenues only be used for like capital projects or land purchases and stuff?
That's a very good question. So it is in the administrative rules that regulate CET. There's a cap of 4% of the funds that can be used for administration. So that component could be used to fund a fraction probably of an FTE. The places that we've looked at where we've run the numbers for them, it generally would be much less than a full FTE for a relatively smaller jurisdiction, unless you pushed a really high rate, which we generally wouldn't recommend. So I would not expect it to fund staffing at a level that would be adequate to create a comprehensive housing program, but it can, to a small extent, defray the costs of administering the CET itself.
Okay.
Second question.
Oh, yes, Commissioner Donald.
Can those same funds be used to pay down SDCs?
They can, and in fact, one of the required uses for CET is to put a certain, if you apply it to housing, you have to put a certain percentage of the funds towards things like paying down the cost of SDCs or backfilling lost revenue from a property tax exemption or things like that. So you have to put a certain amount towards incentives like that to support housing.
Thank you.
Okay. That was my only question that I had, and I guess I agree with what Commissioner McGriff was saying earlier, all of her points. I thought she made a lot of good comments. The last one I'll mention is that I guess in the last year or two, I talked to the Home Builders Association, and I know a lot of times they're viewed negatively, but one of the things that they generally support is that consider allowing SDCs to be paid at the certificate of occupancy rather than with a building permit, or rather than at the time of when the building permit is issued. And it's one of those things like what Commissioner McGriff was saying. I think it's small steps that can help a developer, and it seems like a pretty easy thing. I do know when I talked to John Lewis about this, I think he had some opinions on this about collecting SDCs. I'm sure he had strong opinions, and he's not here, so I'm going to talk about him. I don't think he was very supportive of this one. And so just to be fair, I'll say that out loud. But in general, it is kind of one of those small things. Like I can't imagine us setting aside enough general fund revenue out of our budget to go and, fund a housing development or something like that. And we've talked a lot about whether or not our city was big enough or we had the staff or the capacity to get into the housing program. And we work a lot and very closely with Clackamas County, and Chief Band's going to talk about that when we talk about our homeless policy. But so I kind of view this as one of those small things that maybe we could consider, but we would clearly want to hear from Mr. Lewis on the effects of SDCs and stuff like that. So just my comments on that. Final thoughts?
Yeah, just a caveat. Yes. So I would support that if it is for affordable housing. If it's for if it's for the run-of-the-mill subdivision, no, I wouldn't support paying that at the time of occupancy. But if it's
only for affordable housing,
and I would say that they would have to make sure that it stays affordable for a
certain amount of time
so that we can really lock in, and that savings could be had. Mm-hmm. But to just say, okay, we're just going to do it for everybody,
or even maybe a density bonus. I think I could support a density bonus for like, if you can guarantee you're going to offer affordable housing units and as part of your development. Commissioner Marl.
Thank you. So bringing it back to CET, that's something that I think that we should look at in concert with other things. It's important to keep in mind that in the bill, in SB 1533, the maximum tax can only be 1% of the permit evaluation. Is that correct?
That's correct on residential. It's not capped on commercial and industrial.
Okay. So I think when we're talking residential and we're wanting to make sure that we're not increasing costs for people, I don't necessarily believe that the imposition of a tax like this, even to its max for residential, would be a make or break situation for people. Especially when we can use those dollars for FTE. I brought that up. I think that it's time that we start considering a staff member for housing. And then I will also say, getting to what Mayor Lyles Smith said is, I wasn't going to bring this up, but she basically just brought up optional inclusionary zoning, which is something that I also think that we should be looking into. Optional, with an asterisk on optional, with density bonuses, not necessarily the way that other jurisdictions have done it, where it's been required. I don't think that's the right way forward. But I think that several of these things in concert with each other can be particularly effective, and I would be supportive of moving forward with that.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's got to be a combination. One size isn't going to fit all, so we have to be a little flexible, but.
Yeah. All good ideas, all good small policy decisions that could be made and inch us a little bit closer. So, all right, I don't see any final comments or discussion items, so thank you. Thank you, Becky, for presenting, and thank you, Christina. We've checked the legal requirement for House Bill 2001 or 2003. All right, so we're going to move on to our final discussion item of the evening, and that is our draft homeless strategy for Oregon City. Chief Band.
Good evening, Mayor and Commission.
The clicker.
All right. Okay. So this is about homelessness, and the first part of your goal, the purpose of this. I'm not going to read many slides, but I'm going to read this one. The purpose of this conversation is to discuss each of the approach categories related to the goal, then to use this information to outline the intended priorities for a 5-year strategy. The interesting thing about this strategy is sort of like taking a trip, and you're 3/4 of the way there before you start planning the trip. A bunch of the things we're going to talk about are things we're already doing, and some of the things are things that we can maybe do better, and then some things that we don't do at all. If you remember when we came up with the goals, there was a written under approach. It said staff will work with a consultant to create a written formalized document that outlines the citywide efforts and approach in response to issues related to homelessness. Your consultant, we hired the mayor, the chief, and the city manager. We could have spent money to write a consultant, and maybe when this is done, that's what you want us to go do. The problem with the consultant, one, you're going to pay them money, and two, there's sort of a, depending on who you would hire, who would be a professional or an expert in this field, there's a variety of ways to measure success when it talks about homelessness, and a lot of them I might not agree with. I don't, anyway, enough said. I think you know what I'm getting at there. So how do we measure success? Sort of thinking about this topic from my perspective, listening to people in the community, and it's abundantly clear the pressure that you as commissioners feel. There are people in this community who would say, you will measure success when you've gotten every homeless person out of town. There are people who would say, you will be successful when you have housed every homeless person who is in town. I have not found a community anywhere in the country who's done either of those two things successfully. So I think the way to sort of look at success is a balance of both. The courts have certainly said, in terms of enforcing laws and accountability, the things that we need to do for community members and businesses, we need to be doing the other thing. We need to be helping out. We need to be doing things to get people out of homelessness if we're going to also be enforcing laws or those sorts of things. That's one of the things I think we've done fairly successful. I think it's been very creative, the ways that we've worked this. And one of the measures that I think is if you were to look at years ago, 2013, when this problem was really getting rolling, there were camps everywhere. There were camps on the bluff. There were camps down all over the place. And I think we've gotten a pretty good handle on that. There are still camps around, but it is a lot harder to go find one right now. And we've done that by doing a lot of work with service providers to get people into housing. And then people who do not want housing, then we're allowed to tell them, look, if you're refusing what we're trying to help you with, then you have to pick up your tent and move along because you're refusing services. We were tracking that for quite a while, and over 80% of the people that we were offering services were refusing them. So what this is kind of going to be is I'm going to go through these approaches, and I'm going to talk about what we're doing right now and what we're not doing. And then after that, I'm going to go, so knowing what we talked about, what we did, talk about how do we put that into a 5-year strategy. That strategy, if you saw the document that was attached to that, the bullet points are pulled right from that same written document, okay? So the first approach that we had talked about in our goal setting session was development of an internal Oregon City Homeless Solution Task Force that will include representatives from multiple departments. Right after we had that goal setting session, we just started holding those meetings, and it started as a fairly small group, and it has grown more robust. The recent additions have been Metro, with what's been going on down in Newell Canyon with opening of the park. They're a great partner because they have a lot of resources, and Providence has been down there now too. And again, somebody who has a lot of resources. In the homeless world, you don't really see a lot of governments doing the work themselves. You see, if you look up in Portland, Multnomah County, where they have a lot of money, they have a group of people, they have a basket of money, and they do grants, and they hire 501c3s and different businesses to serve the homeless. So anything we can do to partner with these folks who are, they're literally, I call this the boots on the ground group, and that group continues to evolve, and it's really good for us to see gaps. There's a strong city presence there. The library's there, Parks is there. Those are two other city departments that, like the police department, has seen significant issues and challenges with homelessness. The second approach, engagement with existing advisory bodies and community members. This is something we've done fairly regularly, whether it's our homeless outreach officer, whether it's Val, whether it's me, or our liaison officers who are assigned to each of the neighborhood associations. We've always interacted with the community quite a bit. I do have some opportunities I'm going to mention. Where I think we can get better and need to get better is our more of a formal approach. I think our website needs to be really robust. So if people want to know what is our, and it's really the idea of this part of your goal is if people want to know homelessness in Oregon City, what does that mean? And this document kind of represents our mission, so what we're doing, and then the vision of how we're going to be doing that mission. And we've talked about things like a social media presence, whether or not we had an Instagram or a Facebook or something, so somebody could tune in and because there's a lot of work that gets done, a lot of camps that are cleaned up, a lot of people that are helped, people that are housed. And I think that if people saw some of that, they might feel a little bit better about what was going on. And we certainly need to be more deliberate about that. Number three is identification of resources necessary to address the needs of the homeless population. Oregon City staff, I don't need to repeat what you already know about what Oregon City staff are doing, coordinating our efforts and interactions with members of the community. Services, that group that was meeting, we have everybody from services we can provide for housing, mental health. I think some of them are certainly going to need to get better, and I think that, and that is what we're hoping to affect. Behavioral health is something I'll talk about a little bit later that is probably one of the biggest gaps, but in a couple places in this goal, we talk about the city having a cadre, a Rolodex of social service providers and other agencies that we can partner with, and that has been strong for a while. I'd say it's stronger than it's ever been, and having Metro as invested right now as they have been with the opening of that park has been really good. Where are we at here? Okay. Camp cleanups and beautification. So we've done a bunch of camp cleanups and we'll continue to. Code does. We have also utilized grant funds that we've gotten before to hire a vendor to do cleanups for us. And ODOT and Metro, you've heard different complaints about under 99 or at different overpasses in different places. Sometimes when people are asking us why we're not doing something about camps, whenever we have a camp or something, we have to determine venue first. Whose is this? Who controls the property? If the city controls the property, then we know the rules that we have to go by to see if that's a camp that we have any impact on. If it's ODOT, if it's Metro, completely out of our hands. They're pretty responsive to us. Metro's certainly been really responsive recently. And if it's on private property, that's something completely different too. With those state agencies, some things, people complain it doesn't happen fast enough. It's happening as fast as we can make it happen. And the cleanup piece, I'll go back to something I'm going to talk about later is the reason we do as much we can to help people. We have to be very robust in our efforts to help people if we're going to go to camps and trash areas and try and have an impact there, because we have to be legal in what we do. And one of the ways that we do that and stay out of trouble is really making sure that we're also providing people with whatever services we can.
Can I ask you a question before you move on from that?
Yep.
So on the camp cleanup, so is there any follow-up so that gets cleaned up? So for instance, in Newell Creek Canyon, has there been any efforts through other groups or us to restore the land so that it doesn't get recamped back on it? Because if it looks like it was a camp, somebody's going to come along and go, oh yeah, it looks like I can just perch here.
Well, there is, if somebody it depends on the area.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
So Metro is not ours, but I would say that there's people who play the game too, and we've run into this like in Waterboard Park, where we would go and we have to go post a camp, and they know we've got to post a camp. We'll be back in 24 hours, and you have to have moved your camp, and we will go back, and they've moved their camp 50 feet away, and so then we post that camp, that 24-hour camp, and you've got a small group of people who will play the game. So we work within our framework to do what we can do.
Why don't we just post it all? And that takes care of it.
Did you say why not post it all?
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm going to keep us we don't want to be famous.
Okay, I don't want to be famous either, but
we don't want to be famous.
If we know there's this habitual problem.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yes, I do. The thing I'll say is you actually bring up a point that I think's been fairly consistent to us, is one of the things we've seen other government agencies do is be inconsistent. So they'll come post and then they won't come back for 6 or 7 days. But the fact that we stay on top of things, and when we say we're going to be back in 24 hours, we are there in 24 hours with everything we need to clean up. Pretty soon they go, we'll just go somewhere where we're not going to get, where somebody's not consistent. They, you know, the path of least resistance, those types of folks will go somewhere else. I do feel the need to give the caveat too that when we say homeless people, it's an extremely diverse population. There are people out there who, when we say, hey, would you like some help? They do absolutely everything they can, and we get them housed. And there's a lot of homeless people who get extremely frustrated with other people who are homeless, who create the problems, the ones who destroy property or make their lives harder. So it's an extremely diverse group of people. So I certainly don't want to generalize as I'm talking about.
The reason I ask is because there are several groups I know that have adopted Waterboard Park, and they spend a lot of time cleaning up or doing ivy pools, those sort of things. Mm-hmm. And
yeah, we haven't had a lot of problems down there in terms of camping. Those same people let us know whenever something's going on.
Good. Okay.
Community partner resources, again, the same group. Financial resources has come from the general fund and then from grants. Clackamas County, Metro Enhancement, Department of Justice. So we're utilizing grants. Opportunities, I would say staffing. Depending on how big this program, you know, this is a 5-year strategy. There are several of us in this room who in 5 years are not going to be here. So what is the lasting strategy? What is the lasting expectation? Is this something that we have a police department that does on the side? If the problem's going to grow, I would say that it needs somebody in charge of it. It needs somebody who that's all they do. And I don't mean a police officer who's doing it as an also duty, but somebody who's making sure that we're not missing out on opportunities with grants and a bunch of other stuff. Okay. So, identification of challenges and constraints. I'm going to read this because this is one of the biggest ones, and quite frankly, this is the hardest one for me to deal with. I'm just like all of you up there who get complaints from the community, and I feel a tension when I can't make their problem better. And when it comes to how they feel in their home, that is not lost at all in us. And that's the impact on the community is significant. One of the most challenging things about working through these issues is getting people to feel safe in their community. Providing solutions that resolve the concerns of homeowners and businesses is very difficult. There are homeowners, there are businesses that when I tell them all the things we're doing, they're still upset. It still does not affect how they feel when they're on their front porch. And I wish I had an answer for that. And I hate that I don't have an answer. And I know that you all feel tremendous pressure there too. One of the most frustrating things, I was looking at this slide after putting it together, those two pictures on the left sort of talk about one of the challenges we have in things that we get encouraged by. Mike Day, you remember he was our first outreach officer. He'd come up with this porta potty program. So we had these dressed up porta potties around town. My favorite one was the one on the right there. It was by the bridge. And a homeless guy lit that on fire and burned it to the ground. And eventually, the vendors just said, no more, we're not going to service those anymore. So it was a great program, but I feel like sometimes we're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and that program, we've had to just get rid of them. But that's just sort of the nature of working through some of these challenges and constraints. Lack of mental health services. If somebody's an immediate threat to themselves or somebody else, like right now they're holding a knife and they want to hurt themselves, we can take them to the hospital. The hospital may or may not hold them for very long. If somebody's shouting at the moon, and we've had some people who around town who a lot of people have seen repeatedly, and there's nothing we can do for them. We can go provide critical care right away, talk to them, offer them services, but if they're not going to take the services, there's nothing for us to do and nowhere to take them. And that's a problem that gets talked about, and there's really no movement on that. Substance abuse. the passage of Measure 110, decriminalizing drugs. Not long ago, if you had heroin, it was a felony, and now it's a $100 ticket. We are not allowed to go after somebody who does not pay the ticket, or somebody could agree to take an assessment. They don't have to go get treatment, but they just have to take an assessment. So it is less than a seatbelt ticket. I would never sit here with a straight face and tell you that I think that the war on drugs has worked, but there's no accountability now. I saw a study in 2020 that said that Oregon ranked 49th worst in addiction, and we were worst. We were the worst state in the union for available treatment facilities. And early on, they thought homelessness was about housing, and it's really about mental health and drug abuse. Housing plays into it, but really you have to take care of those issues are predominantly the problem. Getting people into housing. There's a lack of coordinated and focused efforts in Clackamas County. I wish, Portland has an office of staff people who all they do is make sure that every service provider is aligned as possible toward homelessness, and we don't have that yet. We have leaned in on the county and we're continuing to, but I really feel like there's sort of a lack of coordination. And then staffing, something I already talked about. So I'm going to play a video. It's less than 3 minutes. And the reason I'm playing it is because I'm talking about what we're doing, but I also think it's important to talk about what we're not doing. Because if you look at most cities, this is the one area that other cities get into that we have not gotten into. One challenge that I did not put in here is our city size. That is a constraint because most cities who have a homeless problem are much larger than us. Salem has a pretty significant problem. Eugene has a significant problem. Portland has a significant problem. Seattle. I don't know any other city our size that has a concentration quite like we do. And so our resources are just not quite what some of these larger cities are. This is about is this going to play? Good. So there's a program that the city of Vancouver did. There's several other cities that have done these. This gets talked about in this community a lot. About is the city going to do something in terms of providing a place? There's the Veterans Village that the county did. And so I started just because it was getting talked about and I was getting asked what I thought of it. I didn't really know much about them. So I started researching them. There's one in Medford I looked at. I drove to this site before it opened. And what it is the city of Vancouver had 3 sites that they funded. That's a dead-end street you see on the left, and it's right next to I think it's 279 or 280 unit apartment complex. There's that Dutch Brothers right there, and on the right is what that looks like now. And this video will just give you a quick shot at what they did. It's working.
I want to say thank you to everybody for coming out to celebrate the dedication and opening of the first of Vancouver's Safe Stay communities.
Addressing homelessness is first and foremost about the value that every individual deserves a safe place to sleep, a place to call their own where they can keep their possessions. But this program is the direct result of an urgent vision that we've had for the city for quite some time. And it creates an effective path for those seeking a permanent way to get off the streets, to get out of the tents, get out of the cars, and get on that path.
We'll be able to get ahead in life, not get 2 steps back. So we're excited. Being homeless, it's so hard being able to, go out there and be able to find a place at night to sleep every night. Here you can. We know we can. You can come here and just not worry anymore.
This helps so much, Makes me happy that know that the city is doing something like this for the homeless, help them get out of the cold and help them get on their feet, for them to be in here and have permanent heat
This took political will of the entire council, support of city management and staff, as well as the rest of the community.
Bringing people together and giving them a permission to be themselves, to figure out where they want to go, and to figure out what those steps will look like, to live a self-directed life while in a community, it's going to be like everything, and it's going to be life-changing for a lot of people.
Let's open doors and bring people inside. In addition to the security measures, the site includes trash receptacles, sanitation services, portable toilets and hand washing stations, meeting and office spaces, and access to supportive services.
Here we are with the shelters, and it's much cleaner, it's much safer, far healthier. People need safe spaces to be. We can't, keep sweeping camps and then expect that to just resolve itself.
We're gonna feel so much better and so much safer. They're amazing. They may be small, but they're gonna get us out of the cold. They're gonna get us into a stable place.
Being able to offer a place that is a launching pad and a springboard where people can be safe and warm and have a place to help move themselves out of a homeless situation is one of the greatest gifts I think that we can give this holiday season.
It hits me right here, It's great.
It's life-changing. It's the best Christmas present you can ever ask for.
Okay, so just to give you an idea, I'm not suggesting we do this. I think, one, you should know I've had people float all kinds of ideas. A lot of it's come out of the conversation about Newell Canyon, ideas about putting, not this, but hey, let's just put a place on different people with private property in the city, saying, hey, here's a place where people can come with their tents. The code does not allow that, and I don't think that would be successful at all. People looking at trying to get this done maybe outside of the city or in other cities. The same thing I mentioned, just find a place and let everybody put their tents there. I don't think that would ever be successful. These are the sorts of things that hotel program that the county's done. I want to say those hotel rooms were $90 to $100 a night, and they had close to 100 of them. These facilities, they're just doing a second one. They did the bid on the second site for this. So there's 20 units, which can house 40 people. They're staffed, so there's somebody there 24/7, 365. There's a curfew. They have security somehow. It's fenced, and the contract was $552,000, I believe, is what they're paying a church to run it for 1 year. The second location. This first one's run by an outfit called Outsiders Inn. So these sorts of things, whether it was us partnering with another city, encouraging the county to do it, these are conversations going on in the community about whether or not this is something the city would do. It was interesting. The last time I went back after they'd opened for a while to see what it looked like, their city had, I learned, passed an ordinance that there could be no camping within 1,000 feet of this place and no abandoned cars. So people who were in there couldn't have an abandoned car somewhere. I talked to the apartment manager because I thought, man, this place is right next to a huge apartment complex. I bet the manager has something to say about this. She was an absolute fan. She said that the problem was tremendous before, but she said now, she said I hardly see anybody. They used to be in our parking lots and stuff. So interesting. Seems like a fairly successful thing going on there. Vancouver's a much different city than us. Those units, so the city provided the property. They put some street lighting up. They ran electrical to those pallet shelters. Each of the shelters has a heater in it and electricity. There's some people have used wood structures. Different people have talked about that. The thing about these is I think you could move them and there's no upkeep the way there might be on a wood place. And honestly, if you ever grew out of your need, there's probably a variety of cities who would buy these from you.
So the picture you showed, the first one, that was what the street looked like with all the tents and whatnot on it.
Those were two identical views before and after.
The same, yeah, okay, that's what I thought.
Development of a communications engagement plan to inform the community of resources and strategies that have been identified. We've already talked about that, talked about the website. Now, moving forward. So this is the strategy, proposed 5-year strategy. So the first priority, connect homeless people to resources. Every one of these are things that we're already doing. I'm not going to read through them all, but it's doing more of what we're doing, and we are always going to be doing more. We are always going to pivot where we see places to pivot, or making improvements where we think that we need to pivot. If there's one of these bullet points that I think we need to get more organized on, coordinate state, regional, and local resources to streamline and improve service provision. That's sort of starting to happen now. I think the meetings that Tony and I and the mayor met with several people at the county, including one of the commissioners, we've all had conversations with separate commissioners, and I think that that ball's starting to roll a little bit. It needs to roll faster, but that is the one of these that I would say is a place where we can lean in more. The next priority, reduce the impact on Oregon City neighborhood and businesses. The one thing also, so these are all things we're already doing. I won't read every one of them. The one thing, there's a Clackamas County Community Court that's through the DA's office. Bill Stewart, he's been at meetings here. He's very involved in all these meetings. And basically what they do is if there's somebody who needs to, they get arrested because of behavioral problems, but they're mentally ill, they need to get sentenced to go see to get mental health care. They don't really need to go to jail. And so he works to do that, to divert people, to get the same result by diverting somebody from the criminal justice system. Kim Graves, our new prosecutor, talked to her several times about this, and she's already starting what she calls resource court, which is the exact same thing. She's just doing it inside of this courtroom with our judge, and doing the identical things, getting people resources they need and getting some accountability to fix problems that aren't necessarily criminal justice problems. They just sort of spill into the criminal justice world. Priority 3, increase communications and engagement. I already talked about the website. So the first bullet is I gave us about a D+ in that, maybe a C-. But we need to engage better. I think that putting this somewhere in a very robust sense on a website, so somebody can go and look and see everything that we're doing, everyone we're partnering with, what the challenges are, why we can't just go run under an overpass and drag everybody out, you know, what the law says, so they understand better. FAQs have and a bunch of those. We generally get asked the same 5 or 6 questions. And so having those online so people can go, oh, that's why they're not doing that. And that's why the person with mental illness is still sitting on the corner. And maybe we'll have some ideas that come out of that too, that people have that we haven't thought of. The task force, so the second one we're already doing. And then the third, coordinate with local partners to leverage community members who would like to assist with homeless-related issues. When we were doing this document, the mayor had talked about volunteers. There have been some people who've asked, how can I help? We've had that before. We had some people who wanted to organize and meet and do cleanups. It's kind of a problem with cleanups because there's human waste and things that we need to make sure are cleaned up in a certain way with chemicals and that sort of stuff. But people are well-meaning, and, we did have people show up and did a cleanup once. And so that there might be opportunity there in terms of if somebody wanted to volunteer, or even if it was just volunteer days.
Can I interject?
Yeah.
I think the thought here is recognizing the limitations from our past experiences, but I have a list of emails of people who have offered to help. They're like, how can we help? I recognize the problem. I want to volunteer. This is an area I want to volunteer. So what I was kind of thinking in this, where it says coordinate with local partners, that's not necessarily us just leading a camp cleanup. That's Love One. That's the partners that are in that room that are providing services. And maybe we put them in touch with contact people at those organizations that say, Love One's doing a shower, they're doing laundry services, they need help, there's food delivery, there's pantries. So, you know, like right now, folks in our community have no idea the service providers that are providing services within our community. So if we can help make some of those connections between people who are asking to volunteer and the people who are looking for volunteers, just to help make that connection, we thought that would be a good way to, you know, move the needle on the dial in this one thing.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, that's really admirable, but I think Chief Ann has brought up a very specific concern. I would say that based on my limited experience, that probably 3/4 of the people that are having issues, as you said, have mental health issues. And that requires some sort of training. I wouldn't in any way want to walk up to somebody or offer any assistance to somebody who's, you know, who might be a little bit, there's concerns, let's just say. You have to understand, you know, how to deal with people in that condition, because it changes minute to minute, day to day. And I certainly am not qualified. I mean, you can be as compassionate as you want to be, but if somebody is not able to understand or receive that in the manner that it's been given, there could be some consequences. So those things like volunteering for Love One or whatever, that may or may not put a person in contact, but I've had people ask the same question, and they're very well-meaning, but, you know, there's a certain skill set, I think, that goes with some of this. And that's why you have in here, you know, training for staff, because that's not something, you know, none of us who went to graduate school had training on how to deal with people in mental crisis.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right on those interactions. I think if there are probably opportunities we can find, whether it's donation opportunities, sure. Even if somebody says, what can I do? Well, maybe they can donate, you know, something to Father's Heart, or they can, you know, maybe we have a community cleanup day or something like that to sort of, I think people call, we tell them we're trying, and they hang up, and I think that we can communicate with them and maybe bring people who want to get involved into it a little bit to some degree. I think we can do that safely. Priority 4, leverage other funds to support priorities. So we're really doing every bullet point there. The partnering with other organizations, I will say other organizations, some of them are getting better too. You know what Father's Heart used to provide, they've got a housing person there that was on a grant who was pretty instrumental in getting that that hotel program going. So the people we interact with, I think we're getting better as we meet in a group and see what people are doing, and we're seeing ways that maybe we can impact some of the stuff they're doing, but we're also learning from them about what works and what doesn't work, because I think that what I see is an effort in other jurisdictions that is wrought with inefficiency. All people trying to do the right thing, but when you have super limited resources, you have to be super hyper focused on where you're utilizing those resources. So there was one aspect on this third one, consider homeless strategy priorities each biennium. I think we do that. I think we could just maybe be a little more deliberate about having that conversation. I think it's grown to a degree where if we weren't bringing it up, you would ask. So that's probably not a problem. So next steps. I'm just sort of need your direction on, and I said a lot of stuff, a lot of it you've heard before, but in terms of this final document, I don't know if you've looked at it. I found something in it, looking at it again, that I do want to change, but I think the idea of this is this would be somewhere where people, if you want to read, if you want to take a few minutes and read about homelessness in Oregon City, our approach, that's the intent of this document. And I like it. It's been a lot of work. The mayor's been, we've done a lot of work together on this. So any direction of what this final document looks like? This is literally outlining what is supposed to be one of your goals.
Thoughts, comments? I think there's also some questions on there, on your slide. Do you want to tackle the other bullets too?
Yeah. Yeah. The next one, commission presence at those meetings. I realize that going to all of them, but you know, all the stuff you already go to, I think that having a commission presence, even if it wasn't every month, but occasionally going to one of those, the mayor's been to one of them. And it's not policy stuff, but it's good to just hear boots on the ground, literally. You know, you'll have somebody Greg will talk about somebody that they're helping at the library, and Father's Heart will talk about who they are and maybe the best way to talk to them. And it's just kind of good to see that going on. One, I'd encourage all of you at some point, come sit in on one, but I think it would be good to have one of you assigned to it. And so I don't know what you guys feel about that or who would want to.
I would just move to the next bullet.
I would like to think
Unless
about
there's
it.
a volunteer, yeah.
We're kind of, you know, our plates are full.
I figured. No one's throwing chairs at me, so we're doing fine.
So I have a kind of an FAQ question for you.
Okay.
So
go ahead.
One of the questions I get asked all the time, and I don't have an answer for it, and maybe there isn't an answer, but what you know about the laws that have been passed or laws that currently exist. I get asked a lot about why or do people have the right to just plop down wherever they want to plop down? So you know, I mean, you know what I'm getting at. I'm trying to be delicate about how I say this.
So there was a Boise ruling.
Right, I'm aware of that.
What the Boise ruling says is that, I'm paraphrasing like crazy. What the Boise ruling said is people have to be able to rest and sleep. And you have to, if you don't have a place where they can go rest and sleep, you have to let them plop wherever they want to plop. Grants Pass was a little bit different because, I'm paraphrasing.
But that does not include private property. So I mean, somebody's not going to be able to come and plop down on my personal property.
Oh, that's never the case. There's no law that says if you don't want somebody on your property, I'm speaking to sidewalks.
Yeah, okay, and so I've tried to answer this question. I said, I don't know if under our Constitution or any other document that the question I got asked was, does a person have a legal right to be wherever? And I said, not that I am aware of in terms of the law, and I have read, I mean, I can't interpret the Boise case as well as you can, but I did read it. And I said, I don't think so, because one of the big issues that I faced when I was working in Portland was that there are a number of persons who, for whatever reason, do not want to conform to society, and doesn't matter what you offer them, they will say no. And so that leads to the question that I got, well, if they said no, then do they have the right to do whatever and be whatever? And I said, I don't know.
So private properties, there's no question. Right. You have the right to kick anybody off your property that you want. That's trespassing, that's an arrest. Likewise, if the city said, if there was a certain area, if we had a field and we said no trespassing in the field, we're just fine, because we're not singling anybody out. Whether you're homeless or you have the biggest house in town, you can't be in this area. No trespassing. It's a public area, but you cannot be there. Nobody can be in there. Where you get into trouble is any laws or rules that start looking like they're singling people out. And so I always use the analogy. We've had people say, hey, there's a homeless guy asleep on the bench. If my grandma fell asleep on the bench, you wouldn't be calling. That guy doesn't get kicked off. He's got a right to sleep on the bench just like my grandma would. We're not going to kick him off just because he's homeless. So it's in public spaces that everybody is, that is open to everybody. That's where the courts have said we've got to be really careful.
Yeah, that's kind of what I have thought. there have been several areas in another city to the north of us where there's no way you could even walk on the sidewalk because it's being blocked by all sorts of things. And you're forced to walk out the street or someplace else because it's not, you got nowhere to go. So anyway, I hope that the several people that have asked me this question over the last 6 months are listening tonight, because that was,
If I could, Bruce, real quick. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, in response to a 2009 lawsuit by 6 homeless plaintiffs against the city of Boise, Idaho, regarding the city's anti-camping ordinance. The ruling held that cities cannot enforce camping ordinances if they do not have enough homeless shelter beds available for their homeless population. The decision was based on the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear the appeal. Therefore, it's still applicable in the Ninth Circuit, which includes Oregon.
Okay, so the other direction, future, and this is just, I don't know if you have direction or not, but future budget priorities, and then just engagement with Clackamas County. I think that moving forward, the more that we can, there's a lot of money coming, and they're trying to figure out the right thing to do with it. And I think the more that we can inform as you're interacting with them. So the only one I really need direction, or if you have any other questions, let me know. But this document, this whole conversation has been about these strategies and the approaches as they relate to this final document, which is what our strategy, our formal strategy, was supposed to be.
Thing from the commissioners, I will say that we use the word strategies on purpose. And
you mean it's not a policy?
We did have that conversation early on in this document about what are we saying we're doing, how are we measuring success, thinking about that, or what's reasonable, and stuff like that. So that's why they are presented as the way they're presented, that they're strategies that we're going to try to do to support the goals that are in there. If we don't hear any comments or questions, then this is going to move toward final. That's the plan.
I guess one of the things that is, I try to approach this seeing as the glass half full instead of half empty, but it's, for every one person that you actually get to help, I mean, are there 3 more people, 4 more people taking their place that are still out there? And we also hear a lot about, well, these are, I guess, technically they are, I mean, I'm obviously thinking of the traditional way of saying someone's a resident or not. I mean, if you're in a place, you're a resident. But there's the whole deal with you've said this, so we don't have a place for them to go, but we do offer them a place to go, and they say, no, I don't want any service, I don't want anything, I just want you to leave me alone because I want to do whatever I want to do, then that's a different case than not providing anything at all, I presume.
Yes, so this is where we get creative, and this is where we work with people from, there are shelters out there. There's not enough space, but that doesn't mean, it's hard to get a Super Bowl ticket, but you can still get one. You just have to try hard. There are shelters in other places, and we have even gotten creative with people and said, hey, we can get you a shelter in 3 days. We'll put you in the budget in for a couple days until the shelter space is available. As soon as they say no, the landscape has changed. We even offered you to put you up in a hotel, and you said no, which means you want to, you don't want to follow the rules.
You don't want to conform.
I think our guiding principle is we want to help the people who want help. And if you don't want help, we're not going to go out of our way to make it comfortable for you. And it literally is guided by what Tony read to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think we need to move forward with this. I know that there are a number of people in this community, including a person in this room right now, that, have suggested that we create, as you said, there's been support for, or suggestion for, we create a place here and there, as we have this land here or that land there, and we could get, 40 pods or whatever it is. And, it's all about, again, how do we pay for it? I don't think having the land is the problem. I think is how we could pay for it. Do we want to be in the shelter business? Do we want to just provide the land and have somebody else do it? I mean, I don't know. Those are a myriad of questions.
What I think to that point is I don't think that us going out of our way to have every service located in Oregon City. I think the opportunity could be, though, if there's another city, and I have heard there's at least one city who's got a piqued interest a little bit, but maybe they're looking at doing something and we partner with them a little bit. So maybe it's not in our city, it's in another city, but we've got an interest in it. And so all this conversation about a place to go, we're vested in a place that may be somewhere else, but we can still take people there. And so and then it sort of decentralizes some of what's going on. Because I think if there was a little bit of help all throughout the county, then we would have quite the concentration here.
Reminds me of a conversation we had 12 years ago about fair share and helping each of the communities, helping each other shoulder the burden instead of one or two shouldering everything. But I think you brought up a good point that I've thought about. Somebody just doesn't get into homelessness overnight. It is a series of steps, and how do you unravel that? And then kind of like a skein of yarn, how do you get it back onto the spindle by doing reverse engineering, so to speak, to help them get back out of it? I mean, some of it's as simple as you've got somebody that couldn't afford their apartment, they're living in their car, so you help them get an apartment, but they have a job, that sort of thing. There are others who, as we are aware, when they closed the mental hospital, they just kind of said, here's a bus ticket, bye-bye, and suddenly all these people appeared that who should have never been not institutionalized because of whatever their issues were, but they closed it. And, that's, from my standpoint of living in this state, that's when I saw the whole situation start escalating. I mean, it just really went completely out of control.
Okay, so if you are interested in attending one of the homeless coordination meetings, reach out to Chief Bannon. He can let you know when they are. They do hold them every month. They are generally a Tuesday or Thursday afternoon at like 1 or 2 o'clock. And so it is during the week, midday-ish time frame. So if you're working, that may be an issue for you. That's why I don't attend them very often. I do agree it would be good for you to sit in and kind of see the coordination that is going on. It's a positive thing so that you can speak to it specifically if you get questions from the community. Future budget priorities, I think that likely will come back around. This gives us, there could be something that comes up over the next year that we learn about and identify and want to put as a budget request for the next biennial budget. So, essentially this strategy document is kind of lining up where we think we should be focusing our attention and kind of signaling that there are maybe opportunities where this may come back up as a budget item or maybe grant opportunities. And then we're definitely continuing our engagement with Clackamas County. I know Chief Ban, myself, and Mr. Conkle are continuing to meet with Clackamas County on a regular basis. We have another meeting scheduled just in a couple of weeks to talk with other mayors in Clackamas County about work that's going on in other cities. We are trying to engage other cities, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at C4. So that's definitely continuing. So if you have an interest in that or want to be a part of the conversation, let us know. So. Commissioner Marl.
Thank you. Regarding that issue with engagement with Clackamas County, first of all, I was thrilled to see that they unanimously approved the loan advance from Metro for the supportive housing services dollars. And who knows if they'll even need all of it, because hopefully those dollars will be coming soon enough.
First ask?
Right, yes.
They've already asked for a second one, so they're using it.
Right.
Yeah, they're using those dollars. Yep.
But I had an interesting conversation with one of the Clackamas County commissioners the other day, And they brought up exactly what I wanted to bring up, which was how Clackamas County can have some skin in the game and show that they're willing to cooperate with Oregon City, which to an extent they have been. And I realize that there have been a lot of challenges along the way, both with Metro and Clackamas County on both ends. But I remember the last time we had a work session on this issue when we were talking about relocating the Father's Heart. Afterward, I went over to Commissioner O'Donnell and I was like, let's move them to the county campuses over by Red Soils because they need to see firsthand what's going on as well, like we do every single day. And this is exactly what that Clackamas County Commissioner brought up to me is they say, we have prime space here. We have dollars coming in. So I think that should definitely be a part of the conversation because it is a good location. It's near the county buildings where they need to access their services. It's within walking distance of this public safety building where we are sitting right now. So I think that should be a priority, and I would like to see that enter the conversation.
Yeah, the couple things, I might as well go ahead and tell you my C4 things where we are having this conversation. So the couple of things at the county level that I'll mention. So C4, the meeting we had on March 3rd, we came out with, we have a set of things where we want regular updates. The two priorities, though, where we are going to put our heads down and work on this is shelters and services. So, and by services, that includes mental health, behavioral services, coordinating in Clackamas County, having folks step up and really talk about what's needed. And then the other one is transit. And so those are the two priorities. Some of the things that are worth noting coming out of the short session is that housing and homelessness, there was a $400 million package that got approved from the legislature. Clackamas County will receive $2 million for shelters. So that is an opportunity. That's the reason we're talking about this and having these conversations. So, you know, we are super engaged on this. So that's just for Clackamas County. And that's talking about shelters. There's also another pot of money, and I don't have the dollar amount, but it's large, that are specifically for turnkey projects. So this is a continuation of the turnkey projects work that was done before, and that's converting buildings to shelters. So again, a lot of times these dollars are coming out with specific allocations of how they can be spent, but this is another one that, again, is an opportunity for Clackamas County. And then, I think that's about it on the homeless piece. So we've definitely got the conversation started. I've got multiple cities that are contacting me and we're talking about what we can do in Clackamas County. So I feel like we're finally making some traction and we are making some headway. We've made it on getting it a priority for discussion and talking points. I think we do have an opportunity for capital projects. This money that's coming in between them. We also are trying to do an amendment to the Metro housing bond to see if we can use some of those dollars to fill gaps and where we are not able to spend some of these dollars currently. So again, a lot of things in the play. One of our complaints is that a lot of times we have felt like Clackamas County, they show up and they tell us their sales, I'm going to say this really crudely, but it's kind of like a sales pitch. This is what my department does, and this is what my department does, and this is what my department does. And after the end of that 45 minutes, we've heard all about what those departments do, and we still haven't moved the needle on the dial of talking about, well, how can we work with that department, or how are you guys talking and working on these issues that we see from the outside because you guys are not talking in between your departments. So we've been trying to raise that level with Clackamas County and ask for better coordination. And we've pressed that one pretty hard in the last couple of months of trying to stress that. And it's going to continue. Our engagement with Clackamas County has been pretty hefty in the last couple of months. And I'm seeing positive things. So I hope you all are at least a little bit uplifted that there does seem to be a little bit of movement on this topic. And yeah, good things. I'm not seeing anything else, so thank you, Chief Ban. I think we're done with that item. And we're in the last stretch of our meeting.
I'll say this about that item. I thought it was a very good piece of work. It was thoughtful. I compliment our 3 resident consultants. Thank you for doing good work, and thank you for not going out and paying somebody $80,000 to get a document that probably wouldn't be as good as that. So thanks to all three of you.
I will say I did enjoy writing it and working on it with Chief Ban. So yeah, it was good. All right, so city managers report. Do you have anything for us tonight?
Nothing tonight, thank you.
No. Committee reports. Maybe we'll just go down the line and you can report out if you have anything from your committees. I'll start with Commissioner O'Donnell.
Nothing on Beavercreek employment.
Any of your committees?
Oh, on any of them? Let's see. I do have something.
Is it easier for me to just go through them then?
I should have highlighted mine. I think the two that I would comment on, I attended a tourism meeting, and I think our immediate discussion when we first convened today shows my concerns with that. And I think it's interesting the composition of that group lacks a lot of local involvement versus bureaucratic involvement at the state level. And I think it'll be an interesting conversation when we hold it here and Mr. Graham comes before us.
That was economic development.
Well, it was economic development, which tourism was a component. Oh yeah, it was economic development, excuse me. The South Fork Water Board, I think we'll end up having some discussions about specific items that we discussed in our previous meeting, and they may have to take the form of an executive session because they're complex, and we should have some input from not only our own staff, but from our South Fork Water Board personnel. I think those are the two I'm most intimately involved in.
And from the manager of South Fork, but everybody poo-pooed that.
No, everybody's not poo-pooing it. The issues that we talked about are so complex that the starting point on that could be an executive session.
Okay.
And I agree that I certainly wouldn't poo-poo it because the stakes are high and long-term impacts, and we need to have a discussion, but we need to be educated first so that we're conversing on it when we sit here. Thanks.
Commissioner Smith?
South Fork, I haven't had any.
Okay. I'll mention C4. The other couple of things that we had at that March 3rd meeting was that the Clackamas County received the money that they needed for the Clackamas County Courthouse. I think it was $94 million, I believe, from the legislature. They are also getting another $5 million advance for the Metro housing bond work. So that is continuing and seems to be a partnership that is working to backfill the dollars that they need for the housing services until they get more revenue coming in. And then, of course, we talked about I-205 and tolling. And all of those RTP amendments and TPAC and JPAC and how they're working. It is very complicated and nuanced. And that's pretty much it. We did have a meet and greet. We heard from Bridget Daisy, the executive director of Clackamas Workforce Partnership, because there was an interest in workforce development by the cities in Clackamas County, and I think that was the first step of introducing them to Clackamas Workforce Partnership, and to Bridget as the executive director, and allowed them folks to learn more about what Clackamas Workforce Partnerships provide and how they can work with individual cities. So I think with that, impact, there was an impact meeting, which is the Metro Policy Advisory Committee. As usual, they are talking about the I-205 tolling. That is still one of the primary topics of conversation at that, so no surprise there. And do I have any other committees? I do, but I think that's it. Commissioner Marl.
So we had a CIC meeting last night, and there we heard an update from Liz Hannum with DOCA and Victoria with the Chamber. They did get news that the business recovery centers will be extending, so that's good news. And then we also, there have been a lot of conversations about how best to get community members engaged with their neighborhood associations, especially during COVID. And in Kenema, they've decided to start using these sandwich boards using their postcard fund, which is an innovative way to help maybe spread the word in a different fashion. And we're going to be opening that to other neighborhood associations. Well, the other one was the tolling diversion committee. I talked about this a little bit, but they're starting to release new information to us, and they did at the last one. And because almost every single meeting I've gone to for that, it's like I'm hearing the same stuff over and over, and I can recite this probably better than they can. But they're nearing, I believe they have completed their study, and they're slowly just trying to parse it out. And I know I'm personally very concerned about the economic impacts that they say they have studied. They have not given that out yet, but I mean, especially with Main Street, that's something that's of utmost importance to Oregon City. And then I talked about how they showed us their map of projected intersections in, I believe, 2045, and if they'd be better or worse because of tolling, and all of the bad ones were in Oregon City. So, yeah. And that's all I have from that.
And West Lynn, too.
Commissioner Member?
Okay, well, we had a Downtown Oregon City Association board meeting today, and Liz did report on her presentation at CIC, which I was glad to hear about. I decided to take the night off because I know I was going to have meetings all day today. We talked about the board membership campaign, and we also talked about the upcoming events. So these, they are going to be partnering with the city on the first city celebration, July 16th. There will be an Oregon Trail run, not the virtual one that's going on right now, but a real one in person. Following that, basically meeting the requirements of the MOU, but making sure that there is enough bodies and things to do the work that needs to be done. Obviously, we just finished discussing some items with Oregon City 2040, so I don't think we need to go into that. The Oregon City West Lynn Bridge Pedestrian Concept Plan Project Advisory Committee, so I'm waiting to hear from West Lynn about when they're going to have their work session that we had, and I did get asked this afternoon at about 5 minutes to 4 before I walked into City Hall about had our staff worked with their staff to schedule the joint work session, and I said, I don't know, I will get back to the city manager. Willamette Falls and Landings Heritage Area, we met, seems like we just met, but I think we did last Monday. And we are in the process of putting on a program to celebrate businesses that have been in existence 50 plus years, and they've apparently identified a number of them. I could think of several in our own community that will probably be honored. They are also working on an update to the website. And we did have a very, I'm on their RDEI subcommittee, we did have a very frank conversation about membership, which related to whether we were going to invite other tribes or not. And they also did say to extend their thanks to the city for their renewal. We, of course, have been one of the first to step up for our annual support of their group. So that's very encouraging for me. And then last but not least, Commissioner Smith and I are co-chairing the 100th anniversary celebration of the Arch Bridge, and we have a meeting on the 10th at 6 p.m. and we have been having some great robust conversation. Basically what we're hoping to have at this next meeting is people coming back to say what they can do. And I have been putting my thinking cap on. We've talked about doing an exchange of gifts between the two cities. So I sort of volunteered to think about what that might be after I have some further discussions with the city manager about that, what that might be. So lots of fun. It's probably of the committees that I've been on lately have I mean, everybody there is just absolutely over the moon and excited, and it's kind of fun to have that contagious energy. Let me give you just a brief update on where I am with the subcommittee dealing with the Good Neighbor Agreement. So we had a fairly robust discussion at our meeting last month, and it was determined that Tom Johnson and I would go back and do some amending to the document, not taking away the intent, but there were some things that they want to see put in an appendix rather than detailed. I have completed that work, and I'm waiting for Mr. Johnson to get back to me. We met at City Hall for about 3.5 hours hashing through things. There's some things that I basically don't feel comfortable making suggested changes to because it involves the neighborhood association and the neighbors. And so our next meeting, I'm hoping that Mr. Johnson will get in touch with me in the next, we've connected, but we need to meet in the next week so that we can reschedule a meeting. And we also want to try to do it in the evening because some of our neighborhood residents are working during the day and cannot attend a 2:30 meeting. So we'll see what we can do to accommodate people. So, which is why I didn't jump up and volunteer for anything else at the moment. So when I get done with something, one of these little projects, I will volunteer for something else. So that's all I have. And I did want to say thank you. Today is International Women's Day, all day. So thank you to all the women out there in our community who do lots of things for our community. And the theme for this year, as I think, is stop bias. So that's a hard task.
All right, so I think I'll wrap up with a couple positives. So just a reminder, State of the Community is tomorrow. It will be live streamed at 4 o'clock. There will be a few of us here to hear that and hear that presentation or, yeah, it'll be a presentation. And then, answer some questions. I think there's supposed to be a little round table to answer some questions. So that will be live streamed and recorded. I'm sure we'll be making that available. It's hosted by the Chamber of Commerce, so that's a good thing. And then at the end of the month, I'll be meeting with the Cub Scout troop here in the chamber, so I'm really looking forward to that, to answer some questions. They already sent me a list of some very interesting questions that the Cub Scout troop had, some ones that really pertinent and some that were just really hilarious. So I'll be happy to share some of those questions with you after I have that meeting. It was scheduled for a couple of weeks ago. It was scheduled for like right after I ended up having my appendicitis removed, so we had to reschedule it. So Commissioner Marl, did you have something?
Yeah, just a quick thing. So this Saturday, I will actually be flying out to Washington, D.C. to attend the National League of Cities Conference. I'm very excited about that, and I need to give a quick shout out to Ms. Oreskovich for taking my frantic emails because this was a fairly last minute thing, and she has been very helpful. And so, as you know, when I was appointed, there was a lot to learn, and I'm just excited to meet with other people from Oregon's delegation and people from around the country to learn how to be better at what we do. And this will be my first time going on a plane without my mother, so please keep me in your prayers.
Wow, yeah, that's a big step. So there's some interesting news. So the League of Oregon Cities monthly magazine here, there's a picture of downtown Oregon City. It's background, it says happy 50th birthday to Oregon's landmark Bottleville, and I opened up and I said, oh my God, it's Main Street. So we made this, made the magazine.
All right, anything else?
Commissioner Marl, that plane story did not come up during your interview for this.
Don't you think we might have reconsidered?
I think we still, right.
We can't hear you. All right, so with that all, I'd love to end the meeting on a little bit of laughter, so thanks for that, and we're adjourned.